Hello there and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity slows down a little, strange questions are allowed to sit beside us for a while, and science takes the long, quiet road through the more unusual corners of our planet. Tonight, we're going to a dry and remote part of Western China, to a place of mountains, salt lakes, wind-shaped rock, and a mystery that sounds, at first, as if someone has taken a page from a science fiction novel and quietly tucked it into a geology textbook. It is the story of the Baigong pipes, a collection of pipe-like structures reported near Mount Baigong, also called White Mountain, close to Delingha in Qinghai province, near the edge of Tuosu Lake. They have been described as rusty tubes embedded in stone, some lying inside a cave, others scattered toward the shore. And the strange thing about them is not simply that they look like pipes. It is that some people claim they were very, very old. Old enough, if the most dramatic versions of the story were true, to raise a rather awkward question. How could metal pipes exist in a place and time where no human metalworkers should have been there to make them? It is a good question to carry into the night, not because it has to lead us to aliens, lost machines, or forgotten engineers in the desert, but because it shows how quickly the human mind wakes up when it sees a shape it recognizes in a place where it does not belong. A tube in a wall of rock, a round opening in a cave, a rust-coloured line running through stone like the remains of plumbing installed by someone with a very unusual sense of real estate. Most of us know what a pipe is. We have them under sinks, behind walls, in old basements beside radiators, in factories, on ships, and sometimes with great personal disappointment leaking through ceilings. Pipes are human things. They belong to towns and houses and machines. So when someone says that pipe-like objects were found in an ancient mountain, the mind does not politely wait for the sedimentology report. It runs ahead. It starts building scenes. Someone must have put them there. Someone must have needed them. Someone must have had a plan. And if ordinary humans were not supposed to be there at the time, then perhaps, just perhaps, the story is bigger than ordinary humans. Before we wander into that dry landscape, let me ask you something simple. Where are you listening from tonight, and what kind of weather is outside your window? Is it late where you are, with the room dim and the day finally loosening its grip? Or are you somewhere with morning light coming in, the kettle beginning its first important work of the day? It is a fitting question for this story, because the Baigong pipes are not only about a possible object in the ground, they are about distance. Distance in space, across mountains and basins and a high plateau where the air is thin and the land can feel very old, and distance in time, which is often much harder to picture. We can imagine a road, a lake, a cave entrance, even a rusty tube sticking out of stone. But to imagine tens of thousands or millions of years requires a different kind of patience. The mind tries to make a ladder out of dates, and then realizes the ladder is not nearly tall enough. If you find this kind of quiet investigation soothing, if you enjoy these slow journeys through this strange side of Earth, without too much shouting, panic, or someone leaning into the camera and saying the word impossible every 7 seconds, I would be very grateful if you gave the video a like and subscribed. It helps this calm little corner of curiosity reach other people who may also enjoy falling asleep while thinking about ancient lakes, unusual rocks, and the occasional suspicious-looking tube. And if this story keeps you awake for a few minutes longer than planned, then at least it will be for a gentle reason. There are worse things to think about before sleep than a mountain in Qinghai, and a mystery that begins with something as ordinary as a pipe. The Baigong pipes have become one of those stories that travels especially well across the internet. It has all the ingredients: a remote location, a harsh landscape, a claim about impossible age, a suggestion of advanced technology before known civilization, a name that sounds almost cinematic, and best of all, a physical object that people can imagine clearly. This is not a vague legend about a glow seen on a hill, or a rumour about a lost manuscript locked in a room nobody can enter. It is something simple enough to picture. Tubes, holes, rust, stone, a cave, a lake nearby. The very plainness of it makes it more powerful. We are not dealing with floating palaces or crystal skulls or tablets written in starlight. We are dealing with things that look, at least in photographs and descriptions, like old pipes. And old pipes are not mysterious because they are beautiful. They are mysterious because they are practical. They imply a job. They imply design. They imply someone had a reason. That is where the story begins to tug at us. Because if you find a carved statue, you can think of art or ritual. If you find a wall, you can think of shelter or defense. If you find a tool, you can think of work. But if you find something that looks like a pipe, especially a pipe in a cave, the imagination turns immediately towards systems. It wonders what flowed through it. Water, steam, gas, fuel, air. Some unknown fluid with a name that would look excellent in a 1950s science fiction magazine. A pipe is a promise that something once moved from one place to another. That is why the Baigong story became so tempting. It seemed, to some people, not like a random object, but like a fragment of a network. And a network means planning. Planning means intelligence. Intelligence means a maker. Before long, a few rusty-looking formations in a remote place can become a prehistoric facility, a launch site, a power station, or the remaining plumbing of visitors from somewhere rather farther away than the nearest town. Of course, science has a habit of arriving at these parties wearing sensible shoes. It does not always make the story less interesting, but it does make it more disciplined. The careful approach begins with a slightly boring but very useful question. What exactly are we looking at? Not what does it remind us of? Not what would make the most dramatic thumbnail? Not what would cause the largest number of people to stare at their screens after midnight? What is the material? What is the surrounding rock? How did the landscape form? Are these objects really manufactured metal, or are they natural mineral structures that happen to have a shape we recognize? That is the quiet turning point in many mysteries. The object may look like one thing from a distance, but under analysis, in context, and with enough patience, it begins to tell a different story. And the most widely discussed scientific explanation for the Baigong pipes is not that they were made in a workshop before humans existed, but that they may be natural formations, possibly fossilized casts of tree roots, or iron-rich mineral structures shaped by geological processes. Britannica summarizes the likely explanation as fossilized tree root casts, and similar cylindrical forms have been studied elsewhere as products of soil formation and later mineral cementing, where roots rot away and leave hollow or tube-like shapes behind. That explanation may sound less thrilling at first than ancient engineers or extraterrestrial plumbers, but give it a moment, there is something quietly astonishing about it. A living root grows through soil, minerals gather round it, time passes. The root decays, sediment hardens, iron stains the structure, a hollow shape remains, then much later someone finds it and sees a pipe. It is not a machine left by a vanished civilization. It is a memory of life written into stone, wearing the disguise of industry. This is one of the reasons the Baigong pipes are such a useful mystery to explore slowly. They show us a borderland between appearance and explanation. Nature is very good at making things that look designed. It makes stone columns that look carved, crystals that look engineered, basalt that stacks itself into clean geometric shapes, mineral veins that resemble writing, and fossils that can look like tools, gears, coins, or bones from creatures that never existed. The natural world has had a very long time to practice confusing us. Give it pressure, chemistry, water, heat, cooling, roots, cracks, bacteria, erosion, and a few million years, and it will produce objects that look as if someone had a blueprint. Not because nature is trying to trick us, of course. Nature has no need to prank archaeology. It simply follows rules, and those rules can produce patterns. Still, the first emotional reaction is understandable. If you were walking through a bare landscape and came across something round and hollow in a rock face, something that looked like a rusted tube, you probably would not immediately say, "Ah, yes, an excellent example of diagenetic mineralization around organic material." You might say something shorter, possibly involving a raised eyebrow. This is because the brain is built to recognize useful shapes quickly. A pipe looks like a pipe before it looks like a mineral deposit. A face in a rock looks like a face before it looks like erosion. A footprint shape looks like a footprint before it becomes a discussion about mud cracks. Pattern recognition is one of our great survival tools, but it is also the reason we sometimes see intention where there is only process. It helped our ancestors notice predators in tall grass. It also helps modern people notice dragons in clouds and ancient plumbing in mountains. The Baigong pipes sit very neatly in that human habit. They invite the first impression. They reward curiosity. And then, if we are willing to stay with them a little longer, they ask us to do something harder than believing the most exciting version. They ask us to look closely. That may not sound dramatic, but it is often where the real wonder begins. Looking closely means asking how a salt lake changes over time. It means thinking about the Qaidam Basin, about old sediments, mineral-rich water, and the strange chemistry that can happen when living material and geology meet. It means replacing the simple question, who built this, with a set of more patient questions. What grew here? What was buried here? What flowed through these layers? What minerals were available? How did the rock weather? Why are the forms hollow? Why are they rusty? Why do they cluster where they do? A mystery does not shrink when the questions become better. It usually becomes richer. There is also something important in the phrase, humans didn't exist yet, because it is doing a lot of work in this story. It takes a claim about age and turns it into a challenge. If these pipes were really made before humans, then the normal history of technology would not simply need a little correction. It would need a complete rebuild. Metalworking, industry, engineering, settlement, and human evolution itself would all be dragged into the same room and asked to explain themselves. That is why extraordinary claims matter. They are not just decorative. They have consequences. A genuine manufactured metal pipe from a time before humans would be one of the most important discoveries ever made. It would not be a small curiosity tucked at the edge of a travel article. It would be studied intensely, tested repeatedly, argued over in journals, and placed under more microscopes than a biscuit crumb in a forensic laboratory. The more dramatic the claim, the stronger the evidence has to be. Not because scientists dislike surprises, but because big surprises change many connected things at once. And yet, it is also worth noticing that stories like this do not spread only because people are careless. They spread because they touch something real in us. We like the possibility that the world still contains loose threads. We like the idea that not everything has been filed, labelled, and explained. We are drawn to objects that seem out of place because they give us permission to imagine hidden histories. Maybe there was someone before us. Maybe civilization rose and fell in ways we have not understood. Maybe the official timeline is missing a door. Maybe a mountain is not just a mountain, but a locked cabinet. That feeling is powerful. It is not foolish by itself. Curiosity is not the enemy of science. Curiosity is where science starts. The problem comes when curiosity is asked to stop too early, when it finds a thrilling answer and decides that checking would be rude. A calmer way to approach the Baigong pipes is to let the mystery have two lives at once. In the first life, it is the story as it arrived in popular imagination. Metal pipes in ancient rock, a remote cave, a possible age that seems to push beyond human history, hints of a lost technology, strange formations leading toward a lake, a place that local tourism could present as an extraterrestrial relic, because let's be honest, possible natural iron-rich root casts does not always sell as many postcards. In the second life, it is a geological puzzle. It is about how certain shapes form, how minerals replace or preserve organic structures, how rusty iron compounds can make natural objects look industrial, and how a landscape can produce the appearance of design without a designer standing anywhere nearby. Both lives are worth understanding because together they tell us not only about the Baigong pipes, but about ourselves. That may be the most interesting part of this whole story. The Baigong pipes are not only objects in a cave or by a lake, they're a test of how we handle the unusual. When we meet something strange, do we rush toward the most exciting explanation, or do we allow the slow explanation to unfold? Do we treat uncertainty as an empty space to fill with whatever we prefer, or as an invitation to investigate? Do we think debunking a claim destroys the wonder? Or can we see that the real processes of Earth are often stranger, slower, and more impressive than the stories we first invent? A fossilized root turning into something that resembles a pipe may not sound as flashy as ancient visitors from the stars, but it connects biology, chemistry, time, water, stone, and human perception in one small object. That is not a downgrade. That is Earth being Earth, which is frequently more creative than our first guesses. So tonight, we will move carefully. We will not slam the door on the mystery before we have walked through it. We will begin with the place itself, because mysteries are often misunderstood when they are lifted out of their landscapes and made to float around the internet like little haunted souvenirs. The Baigong pipes belong to a specific setting, the dry high country of Qinghai, near Delingha, with mountains nearby and Tuosu Lake not far from the reported cave area. The location matters, the rocks matter, the lake matters, the climate matters, the history of the basin matters. Even the loneliness of the place matters, because a remote landscape makes a story feel older and more secretive, even before a single fact has been examined. Put the same rusty tube beside a modern roadworks project and most people walk past. Put it in an ancient-looking cave near a salt lake on the Tibetan plateau, and suddenly it seems to be waiting for a documentary voiceover and a very serious drum beat. We will also spend some time with the claim itself, because it deserves to be handled clearly. What exactly was said to have been found? How large were the formations? Were they really metal? Were they pipes in the manufactured sense, or pipe-like structures in the visual sense? How did the story become connected to ages before known humans? Who reported it? And how did it move from local curiosity to worldwide mystery? These questions may sound plain, but they are the bones of the investigation. Many strange stories become much less confusing once we separate what was actually observed from what was later added. A tube-like rock is one thing. A 150,000-year-old industrial system made by unknown beings is quite another. Between those 2 points, there is usually a long hallway of assumptions, mistranslations, headlines, repeated claims, missing context, and a few people enthusiastically waving torches where a desk lamp would have done nicely. And then, once the story has had room to breathe, we will let the geologists in. They tend to be patient guests, geologists. They are used to thinking in long spans of time, and they are not easily rushed. They can look at a stone and see ancient water, buried soil, minerals moving through cracks, roots growing and decaying, layers pressing down on layers, and chemical reactions so slow that a human lifetime is hardly a tick on the clock. To a geologist, the Earth is not a static stage with objects placed upon it. It is an active system, folding, dissolving, hardening, staining, cracking, burying, lifting and revealing. A natural pipe-like form is not absurd in that world. It is a possible outcome of processes that have been running quietly beneath our feet for far longer than people have been around to misunderstand them. For now, though, it is enough to imagine the scene without solving it too quickly. A mountain in Qinghai, a cave entrance in a rocky face, a lake nearby, flat and reflective under a wide sky, rust-coloured tubes or tube-like shapes in the stone, a rumour that they are older than they should be, a question that grows larger each time it is repeated. Who made them? Or perhaps, what made them? That small shift from who to what is where the whole story begins to change, but there is no need to hurry there just yet. The landscape has waited a long time, and it can wait a little longer while we step closer slowly and look at the mountain where the strange pipes were said to begin. Baigong Mountain does not sit in the sort of landscape that looks eager to explain itself. It rises in Qinghai province, in the high country of western China, not far from the city of Delingha and near the waters of Tuosu Lake, a place also written in some accounts as Tosun Lake. The reported pipe-like formations are associated with White Mountain, or Mount Baigong, roughly 40 kilometers southwest of Delingha, in the Haixi Mongol and Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. That is the sort of distance that sounds modest on a map, just a short line between a town and a mystery. But places like this are rarely measured properly in kilometers. They are measured in emptiness, in dry wind, in the length of the road, in how slowly the horizon changes as you move across it. A mystery found in the middle of a busy city has to compete with traffic lights, restaurants, apartment blocks, and someone trying to park badly. A mystery found in a remote basin beside a quiet lake gets a stage all to itself. Qinghai itself is one of those regions that can make a person feel slightly smaller in a useful way. It is not the crowded image of China that many people first imagine, with towers, neon, fast trains, and cities so large they seem to have their own weather. This is China in a different mood. Qinghai lies on the northeastern part of the Tibetan Plateau, a land of high elevation, open basins, cold nights, salt lakes, grasslands, dry mountains, and distances that can make even a small journey feel like a quiet expedition. The air can be thin, the climate can be harsh. The land can look stripped down to its essential shapes, as if the planet has set aside decoration and left only stone, water, sky, and wind. It is not empty, of course. No real place is empty. People live and travel through Qinghai, animals graze across its open spaces, and lakes hold their own ecosystems. But to an outsider, especially one arriving with a story already in mind, the landscape can feel lonely in a way that helps mysteries grow taller. That loneliness matters. It affects how the story feels before the evidence has even entered the room. Imagine hearing that pipe-like objects were discovered behind a supermarket. Interesting perhaps, but not exactly spine-tingling. Now imagine hearing that they were found in a weathered mountain near a salt lake in a remote part of Qinghai, surrounded by dry earth and a wide, pale sky. The same object becomes heavier. It seems older. It seems less ordinary. The mind begins to remove modern explanations almost automatically. No factories nearby, no city pipes, no obvious construction site, no convenient person in a hard hat saying, "Ah, yes, those are ours. We wondered where they went." The place itself starts to argue on behalf of the mystery. It says quietly, "Look how far we are from everything. Surely something strange could have happened here." The mountain at the centre of the story is often called Baigong Mountain or White Mountain. In descriptions that made the story famous, 3 caves were said to occur on the front face of the mountain, though 2 of the smaller cave mouths are reported to have collapsed. The largest cave, according to those accounts, is the one that can be entered, and it is described as about 6 meters high. Inside and around this cave, people reported pipe-like features, including larger tube-like forms and other reddish-brown structures on the mountain and near the lake shore. Tuosu Lake is said to lie only about 80 meters from the mouth of the largest cave, close enough that the story naturally begins to connect the cave, the pipes, and the water into one imagined system. That closeness to the lake is important for the imagination. A pipe in a cave is odd. A pipe in a cave near a lake begins to feel like engineering. You do not have to be a plumber, an archaeologist, or an ancient astronaut enthusiast to see why. Pipes move things, and lakes contain things that might be moved. Water is the obvious candidate. A person hears that there are tubes in stone leading toward or found near a lake, and the brain immediately starts sketching a purpose. Perhaps they carried water. Perhaps they drained something. Perhaps they belong to a larger structure that has vanished. Perhaps the cave was not a cave at all, but part of a facility. This is how a landscape can become a machine in the mind. A mountain becomes a wall. A cave becomes a chamber. A lake becomes a reservoir. A rusty formation becomes a pipe. Add enough unknowns, and suddenly the quiet shore of Tuosu Lake is wearing the costume of an abandoned industrial site from a time when industry should not have existed. But before we let the imagination install control panels and warning lights, it is worth staying with the physical place a little longer. The Kaidam Basin, the broader region in which Delingha sits, is a dry, high-altitude basin shaped by long geological history. Basins like this are good at preserving odd things, not because they're trying to be mysterious, but because they collect sediments, salts, minerals, and the remains of changing environments over great spans of time. Lakes expand and shrink. Shorelines move. Minerals precipitate from water. Sediments harden. Organic material can become buried, altered, stained, replaced, or preserved in forms that are easy to misread later. The surface we see is only the latest version of a place that has been rewritten many times. A dry slope or cave wall may not only be a wall, it may be a page from an older landscape, one that had different water, different soils, different plants, and different chemistry. This is one of the quiet traps in stories about strange objects. We often picture the landscape as if it has always looked the way it looks today. We imagine the mountain standing there for ages, the cave open, the lake placed neatly beside it, the pipe-like structures waiting patiently for someone to notice them. But landscapes are not furniture. They move, slowly and stubbornly. Rock erodes. Sediment is laid down. Water levels shift. Shorelines retreat or advance. Wind cuts and polishes. Rain, even rare rain, finds cracks and works on them. Minerals move through tiny spaces. The place that appears still is actually the result of a long argument between forces. The argument is just so slow that humans usually arrive for only the final sentence and assume we have understood the whole conversation. A cave beneath or within a mountain face adds another layer to the feeling. Caves have always attracted stories because they are natural entrances into the hidden part of the world. A cave is not just a hollow space, it is a boundary. Outside there is daylight and distance. Inside there is shadow, cool air, stone, and the sense that the ordinary rules have become a little quieter. Even a small cave can make the imagination lower its voice. The Baigong cave, as described in popular accounts, has that exact narrative power. It is not a grand tourist cavern full of lamps and walkways. It is a reported opening in a remote mountain, with strange tube-like features inside or nearby. That is enough. The mind does the rest, because caves make excellent containers for unanswered questions. If you were standing at the entrance, the first thing you might notice would not necessarily be the pipes. It might be the dryness of the air, or the colour of the rock, or the way sound behaves when the land around you is open and still. You might look back toward the lake and see its surface catching the light, flat and calm, while the mountain behind you holds its shade. The cave mouth would be a darker shape in a pale face of stone. You would probably feel the ordinary caution that comes with entering any natural opening. Loose rock overhead, uneven ground below, a temperature change as you step inside. Then, somewhere in that dimness, the eye would catch a round form, a line, a reddish stain, a hollow shape where you did not expect one. The modern mind would reach for the nearest familiar category. Pipe. That word is doing almost too much work. Pipe sounds certain. Pipe sounds manufactured. Pipe sounds as if someone ordered it, measured it, fitted it, and possibly complained about the price. But in many reports about the Baigong pipes, the safer phrase is pipe-like features. It is less dramatic, but much more honest. A natural object can be pipe-like without being a pipe in the human sense. It can be hollow, cylindrical, iron-stained, and embedded in rock without ever having been forged, cast, welded, installed, or used. That distinction may seem small, but it is the hinge of the whole mystery. Many strange claims begin when a visual similarity is quietly upgraded into an identity. It looks like a pipe becomes it is a pipe. It is near a lake becomes it must have carried water, It is old because it was made before known humans. A chain of little steps can carry a story a very long way from the ground. The reported formations around Baigong Mountain are often described as reddish-brown. That colour matters too because rust is one of the most recognisable signs of metal decay. Show most people a reddish-brown stain on a cylindrical object, and they will think of iron. Old iron railings, old iron tools, old pipes under a sink that have had quite enough of this world. So when the Baigong formations are called rusty or iron-like, the object becomes even more industrial in the imagination. Yet iron is not only a human metal. Iron is everywhere in geology. It stains rocks red, brown, yellow and orange. It forms oxides and minerals that can coat surfaces, fill cracks, cement sediments, and give natural formations the look of something corroded. A red-brown tube in stone may feel like a machine part, but the Earth has been making iron-stained structures long before anyone learned to smelt ore or misplace a wrench. Still, one can understand why early descriptions caught attention. The largest cave was reported to contain a half-pipe-like object, around 40 centimetres in diameter, with another similar feature partly visible, while smaller pipe-like structures were described above the cave and along the lake shore. Those details, repeated in articles and retellings, helped shape the famous version of the story. Large tubes, smaller tubes, mountain, cave, lake, remote region. It sounds organised, even before anyone has proved organisation. The human mind is very sensitive to clusters. One round object might be a coincidence. Several round objects in the same area begin to feel like a pattern. And patterns, especially patterns that resemble technology, invite us to imagine intention. This is why the landscape beneath Baigong Mountain is not just a background. It is part of the mechanism by which the mystery works. The cave focuses attention. The lake suggests purpose. The remoteness removes easy modern explanations. The red-brown colouring suggests metal. The shapes suggest pipes. The mountain gives everything a sense of age. Each piece supports the next until the story feels almost self-evident. But self-evident stories can be dangerous in a very gentle way. They feel complete too early. They allow the first impression to dress itself up as a conclusion and sit comfortably in the best chair. Science, when it is doing its job, politely asks that first impression to stand up for a moment so the furniture can be checked underneath. There is another reason this setting matters, and it has to do with time. A dry open landscape makes the past feel close to the surface. In greener places, life covers everything quickly. Forests drop leaves, moss grows over stone, roots break through paths, rain softens edges, buildings disappear behind vines and weather. But in arid regions, objects and formations can remain visible in a way that feels almost unnerving. Stone faces stay exposed. Sediments sit in plain sight. Bones, shells, mineral crusts and old shorelines can be easier to see. The land looks as if it is keeping fewer secrets, which ironically makes the secrets it does seem to hold feel more intense. When something unusual appears in a bare place, there is nowhere for it to hide, and nowhere for the viewer's imagination to rest. Qinghai's high landscapes also remind us that not all remoteness is tropical jungle or polar ice. Some remote places are dry, open and bright. There is no thick forest curtain, no swamp, no dramatic mist rolling over ruins. There is simply a great deal of space and a sense that human activity is a recent visitor. This matters for a story like Baigong because it can make the reported formations feel detached from known history. The fewer visible signs of people, the easier it becomes to imagine a deeper unknown. But the absence of modern industry in the immediate area does not automatically point to ancient industry. Sometimes it points to the opposite. A landscape where natural processes have had the room, time and exposure to leave strange forms behind without being buried under roads, buildings or garden centres. It is also worth being careful with the word discovered. Strange formations in a landscape may be noticed at different times by different people. They may be known locally before they become famous elsewhere. They may be reported by visitors, promoted by officials, discussed by journalists, and then transformed by international retellings. In the Baigong story, popular accounts often mention that the formations came to wider attention in the early 2000s, when reports described mysterious pipe-like objects near Mount Baigong and linked them to the possibility of an extraterrestrial relic site. From that point, the location became not only a physical place but a story place, something people could visit through articles, videos, forum posts, and later short online summaries that often trimmed away the cautious language. A cave with pipe-like formations became ancient metal pipes. A puzzling site became proof. The distance between those versions is not measured in kilometers either. It is measured in adjectives, and yet, even stripped of exaggeration, the setting remains interesting. A cave near a lake in a dry basin, with iron-rich, tube-like structures in and around it, is a perfectly good geological puzzle. It does not need to be a launch pad, though some retellings have enjoyed that idea very much. It does not need to be a lost factory. It does not need to be the plumbing system of visitors from another world who apparently crossed interstellar space and then chose a quiet corner of Qinghai for a bit of pipe installation. The real setting is already enough to make us ask how forms like this develop. Were they shaped by sediment around roots? Did mineral-rich water fill cavities? Did iron compounds cement the material? Did later erosion expose the structures in a way that made them seem artificially placed? These questions are not less interesting because they involve geology. They are more interesting because they connect the object to the place, instead of lifting it into fantasy. Think of the cave not as a hidden room, but as a cross-section. Natural openings often reveal what the surface hides. A cave, a cut bank, a cliff, or an eroded slope can expose layers and structures that were formed long before daylight reached them. What looks like an object inserted into rock may in fact be something that formed with the rock, or within the sediment before it hardened. This is a key difference. A manufactured pipe is placed into a setting after someone makes it. A natural pipe-like structure can be created inside the setting itself. It is not an intruder. It is a feature of the material. If you do not know this, the object seems impossible. If you do know it, the impossibility begins to soften into a process. Tuosu Lake adds another quiet clue, though not the kind that solves everything instantly. Lakes in arid basins can be chemically active environments. Their waters and surrounding sediments may concentrate minerals. Shorelines can preserve traces of past conditions. As water levels change, sediments that formed underwater or near water can be exposed. Mineral crusts, concretions, and cemented structures may appear in places where the modern landscape gives only part of the story. A lake near a strange formation is not automatically evidence of a water system built by intelligent beings. It may simply be part of the environmental history that helped create or expose the forms. The same lake that makes the story feel engineered may, in the slower explanation, be one of the reasons the geology became strange enough to be mistaken for engineering. This is where the setting begins to do something rather satisfying. At first, the mountain, cave, and lake seem to support the most dramatic story. But when viewed patiently, those same features also support a natural investigation. The remoteness that makes ancient technology feel possible also preserves unusual geology. The dryness that makes the site look abandoned also helps expose mineral forms. The lake that suggests a pipeline also suggests mineral-rich sediments and changing shorelines. The cave that feels like a chamber also acts like a window into the rock. The story does not lose its atmosphere. It gains a second layer. The landscape is no longer just the spooky backdrop behind a strange object. It is the main character. If you imagine walking away from the cave toward the lake, you might notice smaller reddish forms among the stones, some described as lying along the shore or even appearing in the lake area. This spread of reported features helped feed the idea that the pipes formed a larger arrangement. But natural processes also produce repeated forms across a landscape. Root systems can branch, sedimentary conditions can repeat, cracks can guide mineral movement, concretions can form in clusters. A field of similar shapes may feel like a designed network, but repeated conditions often make repeated results. Nature is not random in the way we sometimes use that word. It follows patterns. Those patterns can be regular enough to look planned, especially when erosion removes the messy context and leaves behind only the most durable pieces. In a place like Baigong, the difference between artifact and formation depends on details that are easy to skip in a dramatic retelling. Are there tool marks? Are the walls of the tubes uniform in a way consistent with manufacturing? What minerals are present? Are there organic traces? How do the structures relate to the surrounding sediment? Do they cut across layers as an inserted pipe might? Or do they follow natural bedding and growth patterns? Are they made of smelted metal or iron-rich rock? Do they show industrial alloys or ordinary geological chemistry? These are not glamorous questions, but they are the questions that decide whether a mystery becomes a revolution or a lesson in how the Earth makes convincing disguises. The lonely landscape may also explain why the story became useful for tourism. A remote site with unusual formations and a possible extraterrestrial angle is easier to advertise than a remote site with ambiguous iron-rich geological structures. That does not mean the whole story was invented for tourists, but it does remind us that once a mystery becomes public, it enters a human economy of attention. Signs, guides, articles, headlines, and videos all begin to shape how people arrive at the place. Visitors may come not to ask what the formations are, but to see the alien pipes. Once a name like that sticks, it is difficult to peel off. The landscape becomes branded by its most exciting interpretation, and after that, even ordinary stones nearby may find themselves under suspicion, which is unfair to stones, who are usually just trying to get through the day. Still, there is something charming about the fact that the Baigong pipes are not hidden in a laboratory drawer or locked away in a private collection. They belong to a real landscape. However exaggerated the story has become, the setting can still be visited, studied, and placed back into geological context. This separates it from purely imaginary mysteries. There is a mountain, there is a lake, there are reported pipe-like formations, there are descriptions of caves and reddish-brown structures, there are claims, and then there are explanations that can be tested. The case invites the best kind of skepticism, not the kind that sneers from a distance, but the kind that travels to the place, looks closely, takes samples, compares formations, checks chemistry, and allows the evidence to be more interesting than the rumour. As the light changes across the Qinghai landscape, the mountain would not need to do much to seem ancient. It simply has to stand there. Human beings are very responsive to that kind of stillness. We see a mountain and assume permanence, even though mountains too are temporary on the scale of Earth. We see a cave and assume depth, even if it is shallow. We see a rust-coloured tube and assume a maker, even if the maker was root, water, mineral and time. The Baigong story begins in that gap between what the eye recognises and what the land has actually done. It is a small gap at first, but it opens widely enough for aliens, lost civilizations and ancient machines to walk through, wearing very confident boots. So the lonely landscape of Qinghai is not just where the Baigong pipes were reported. It is why they became believable to so many people. The distance from Delingha, the dry openness of the basin, the cave in White Mountain, the nearby water of Tuosu Lake, the reddish-brown tube-like forms, and the lack of obvious modern industry all work together to create a powerful first impression. It feels like the sort of place where an old secret could survive. And perhaps it did, though not necessarily the secret people first imagined. The secret may not be that someone built metal pipes before humans existed. It may be that the Earth can build pipe-like forms without anyone building anything at all. But before that explanation can mean much, we need to look more closely at the objects themselves, at what was actually described, what was measured, and what the word pipes may have smuggled into the story before the evidence had a chance to speak. The first difficulty with the Baigong pipes is that the name sounds more certain than the objects themselves. Pipes. It is a word with edges. It arrives already wearing a tool belt. The moment we hear it, we picture hollow metal tubes made to carry water, steam, gas, or something else that needed to go from one place to another without making a mess on the floor. But when we look carefully at what was actually reported near Baigong Mountain, the story becomes less like a neat discovery of ancient plumbing and more like a collection of odd tube-like features in stone, some large, some small, some embedded, some fragmentary, some described as rusty scraps or strangely shaped stones. That may sound like a small adjustment, but it changes the whole mood of the mystery. A pipe is an artifact. A pipe-like structure is a question. The famous descriptions focus on the largest accessible cave in the face of White Mountain. According to commonly repeated accounts, 2 pipe-like structures were noticed inside that cave. One was described as about 40 centimetres across, which is large enough to make the imagination sit up straight, because that is not a tiny crack or a little mineral vein that one might overlook. A 40 centimetre tube sounds like infrastructure. It sounds like something that had purpose, scale, and possibly a very determined engineer standing nearby with a clipboard. Another similar feature was said to enter the ground or appear partly exposed, while more pipe-like forms were reported outside the cave, on the mountain, near the shore of Tuosu Lake, and in some accounts even beneath or within the lake area. The cave itself has often been described as about 6 meters high, with Tuosu Lake lying close enough nearby that people naturally began wondering whether the formations once connected the mountain to the water. Those details became the skeleton of the mystery. A cave, a lake, rusty tubes, and no obvious builder. But skeletons can be misleading when they are dressed too quickly. The early public story did not present a polished excavation report with carefully mapped coordinates, clean diagrams, lab-certified samples, and a cautious conclusion at the end. Instead, it moved through news reports, local discussion, tourism promotion, retellings, translations, and later the great echo chamber of the internet where a strange claim can start as a question in the morning and become ancient proof by lunchtime. What was actually found, as far as the most grounded descriptions allow us to say, was not a set of smooth industrial pipes arranged like a modern plumbing system. It was a group of natural-looking pipe-like formations and fragments, many of them red-brown in colour, associated with sandstone, cave walls and the lakeside environment. Some looked hollow, some looked cylindrical, some appeared to have iron-rich surfaces, and because they resembled pipes, the simplest word became the stickiest word. That word brought a lot of extra baggage with it. If someone says that reddish cylinders were found in stone, the mind may stay curious but patient. If someone says metal pipes were found in ancient rock, the mind begins drafting headlines. This is one of the quiet lessons of the Baigong case. A mystery can become larger not only because of what is found, but because of what it is called. The difference between a tube-like iron-rich formation and a metal pipe may not seem enormous at first, especially to someone who simply wants to know whether it looks strange. But scientifically, it is the difference between a possible geological structure and a manufactured object. The first belongs to the long toolkit of Earth processes. The second belongs to intelligence, technology, and history. One asks about minerals, roots, sediments, and water. The other asks who built it, when, and why they failed to leave a warranty card. The rust-coloured appearance is probably the main reason the objects felt so persuasive. Rust is familiar. It is the signature of aging iron in our ordinary world. We see it on old gates, pipes, shipwrecks, tools, tractors, drain covers, and forgotten bicycles slowly becoming part of the garden. Rust means metal, decay, time, and neglect. So when people saw red-brown material in cylindrical forms near a cave, It was easy to interpret that colour as evidence of corroded iron pipes. Yet iron oxides are not exclusive to human-made metal. They are among the great painters of geology. They stain cliffs, deserts, riverbeds, soils, sandstones and mineral crust with reds, oranges, yellows and browns. A rock can look rusty without ever having been part of a machine. The Earth has had iron chemistry long before humans had furnaces, and it has never needed our permission to make something look like an old pipe from a cellar. The chemical descriptions that circulated around the Baigong pipes added another layer of intrigue. One reported analysis, attributed to Liu Shaolin at a local smeltery, found material described as containing roughly 30% ferric oxide, along with large amounts of silicon dioxide and calcium oxide. In some retellings, a portion of the material was said to be unidentified, and that unidentified fraction became the kind of detail that mystery stories love. A small unknown number can grow into a large implication if handled carelessly, but oxide percentages in a sample do not automatically describe a manufactured metal object. They can also describe ordinary mineral mixtures, cemented sediment, iron-rich rock, calcite, silica, or other natural materials. A test that says there is iron oxide present does not say, "Congratulations, you have discovered prehistoric plumbing." It says there is iron chemistry in the sample, which in a place full of rock, sediment and minerals is not quite as shocking as it sounds when whispered over dramatic music. Silicon dioxide, for instance, is not an exotic clue from an unknown civilization. It is the chemical form behind quartz and a major component of sand and many rocks. Calcium oxide in a compositional report may correspond to calcium-bearing minerals such as calcite, which is also extremely common in geological settings. Ferric oxide is oxidized iron, the stuff that gives many rocks their red-brown colour. Put those together in the right context, and you may not have an industrial alloy at all. You may have a mineralized natural formation that happens to be hollow, stained, and shaped in a way that annoyingly resembles something from a hardware store. Nature is very good at this sort of thing. It makes basalt columns that look cut, crystals that look assembled, concretions that look sculpted, and root casts that look like pipes. It does not do this to confuse us personally, though sometimes it feels that way. There is also the question of shape. Manufactured pipes, especially if they are part of a functioning system, tend to show certain kinds of regularity. They may have consistent diameter, recognizable wall thickness, joining points, seams, fittings, valves, bends made for a reason, or evidence of being installed in relation to other parts. Their materials usually tell a story of manufacture: smelting, casting, alloying, rolling, welding or machining. A natural pipe-like feature can be cylindrical and hollow, but it does not necessarily share that deeper pattern of design. Reports from Baigong describe forms that vary widely in size and shape, with some large and others much smaller. That variety matters. It does not prove a natural origin by itself, but it does make the simple image of a tidy engineered pipe network less convincing. A jumble of iron-rich tubes in stone may still be strange, but strangeness is not the same as planning. When early accounts spread, some of the smaller objects near the lakeshore were described as pipes, ranging from large forms down to very narrow pieces, sometimes compared in popular retellings to thin sticks or even toothpick-sized fragments. That detail can be used dramatically, as if it shows a complex range of technical components. But it can also point in the other direction. Natural systems often create repeated shapes at different scales. Roots branch from thick to thin. Cracks widen and narrow. Mineral concretions form around pathways of water or organic matter. Sediments harden unevenly. Erosion then exposes pieces of the system, leaving the observer to find fragments and imagine the missing design. If a person finds one large tube and many small ones nearby, the mind may think of plumbing. A geologist may think of root systems, sediment-filled voids, mineral replacement, or iron-cemented channels. Both are pattern recognition. Only one has to survive the lab. A particularly important part of the story is that later reports described organic matter of plant origin in the material and even features resembling tree rings in some sections. According to summaries of those reports, Chinese scientists using atomic emission spectroscopy found indications of plant material, and the idea that the formations were fossilized tree roots or root casts became the most likely explanation for many investigators. Britannica describes this as the explanation scientists found most probable. Mineral elements forming around tree roots, the roots decaying away, and hollow pipe-like cylinders remaining in the sediment. Similar cylindrical structures have been studied in other places, including southern Louisiana, where researchers interpreted them as taproot casts formed through soil and diagenetic processes. That may sound like a sudden leap from metal pipes to trees, but it is not as strange as it first appears. A root can make a tube-shaped path through soil. It is already a long, branching cylindrical structure. As the surrounding sediment changes, minerals can gather around it. The organic material may decay, leaving a hollow or partly hollow form. Iron compounds can stain and cement the structure. Silica or calcite can become part of the mineral mix. Over time, the original root is gone, but the space it shaped remains. What began as living tissue becomes a geological cast. Much later, erosion exposes it, and a human observer sees a tube in the rock. The observer is not foolish for noticing the resemblance. It really can look pipe-like. The mistake is not in seeing the shape. The mistake is in deciding too quickly that a familiar shape must have a familiar human cause. Root casts are a lovely example of how life and geology can collaborate across time. The tree grows in soil, pushing down and out, searching for water and stability. The root creates a structure. Floods or sediments bury it. Groundwater carries minerals through the spaces between grains. Chemistry changes. Organic matter slowly disappears. Pressure, cementation, and mineral replacement preserve the form in a new material. The result can look like a fossil, a tube, a branch, a pipe, or something between all of them. It is not a fossil in the simple childhood sense of a leaf pressed into stone, though that image is helpful. It is more like a mould or cast left by something that once lived. And when iron is involved, the cast can take on the red-brown, rusty look that makes the modern mind reach for industrial explanations. The Qaidam Basin has not always looked the way it looks today. This is easy to forget because the present landscape is so strong in the imagination, dry, open, high and spare. But geological and climatic histories shift. Areas that are now arid can once have supported more vegetation. Lakes can expand, shrink, become saltier, or leave behind sediments. Rainfall patterns can change as mountains rise and redirect moisture. If the surrounding region once supported vegetation in a wetter period, then ancient roots buried in sediment become a reasonable part of the story. A pipe-like object in a dry cave today may not belong to the dry cave environment as we see it now. It may belong to an older setting, preserved and revealed only after the climate, landscape and rocks changed around it. This is why the phrase "found in stone" deserves careful handling. It makes the object sound like something inserted into a finished rock wall, as if someone drilled into a mountain and pushed pipes through it. But many structures found in stone formed before the stone was fully stone. Sediment can begin as loose material: sand, silt, mud, gravel, organic debris. Roots grow through it. Water moves through it. Minerals accumulate in it. Later, the sediment hardens into rock. When we encounter the final rock, we forget that it had a softer past. A tube inside sandstone may be a preserved feature from the sediment's earlier life, not an object forced into hard stone after the fact. This is a bit like finding raisins in a baked cake and assuming someone drilled them into the cake after it came out of the oven. Possible, perhaps, if someone had a very strange afternoon, but not the first explanation one should reach for. There were also reports of thermoluminescence testing that suggested great age, sometimes connected in popular articles to a figure around 150,000 years. This part of the story has been especially good at escaping its cage. In the dramatic version, the date becomes the age of the pipes as manufactured objects, which then becomes proof that someone made metal pipes before known human activity in the area could explain them. But thermoluminescence is a method that can date when certain minerals were last heated or exposed to sunlight, depending on the material and context. It does not magically identify the object as artificial. If the structures are natural mineralized formations, then an old date does not create an ancient factory. It simply tells us something about the geological history of the material. Old natural formations are not surprising. The Earth specializes in old. This is one of the places where the Baigong story becomes a lesson in how facts can be true in one sense and misleading in another. A formation may indeed be older than known human settlement in the area. That does not make it artificial. A rock can be millions of years old. A fossil root cast can predate local human habitation by vast amounts of time. A mineral vein can be older than language, older than agriculture, older than every house and road and teacup on Earth. Age alone does not imply technology. It only becomes mysterious if we first assume the object was manufactured. So the real question is not simply, how old is it? The better question is, what is it? Once that question is answered, age takes its proper place. An ancient machine would be revolutionary. An ancient natural formation would be geology, doing exactly what geology is allowed to do, which is almost anything, provided it has enough time and chemistry. Another detail that often appears in accounts is the idea of a nearby pyramid-shaped mountain or pyramid-like structure. This has helped the story enormously, because pyramids and pipes together sound much more suspicious than rocks and root casts. A pyramid shape invites thoughts of builders, monuments, hidden chambers, and lost knowledge. But mountains and hills can form triangular or pyramid-like profiles through ordinary erosion and structure. A mountain that looks somewhat like a pyramid is not the same as a pyramid that someone built. In the Baigong story, the pyramid language seems to have intensified the sense that the site was architectural. The cave became an entrance, the tubes became infrastructure, the lake became part of a system, the land itself seemed to become a facility. But the more cautious view is simpler. A mountain face with caves or openings, surrounded by unusual geological formations, later described through words that made it seem more artificial than the evidence required. What was actually found, then, depends partly on how carefully we separate observation from interpretation. Observation. There are pipe-like or tube-like structures reported near Mount Baigong, associated with a cave and nearby lake area. Observation. Some are reddish or rusty-looking. Observation. At least one large form was described as about 40 centimeters in diameter. Observation. Some material analyses reported iron oxide, silica, and calcium-bearing components. Observation. Later reports indicated plant-origin organic matter and ring-like features, supporting a natural explanation involving fossilized roots or root casts. Interpretation. They are metal pipes. Stronger interpretation. They were made by intelligent beings before humans existed. Strongest interpretation. They were evidence of extraterrestrial activity. Each step moves farther from the object and deeper into story. The problem is not that interpretation is bad. We need interpretation. The problem is that the most exciting interpretations can start running before the observations have tied their shoes. There is a pleasant humility in saying, pipe-like. It admits that the object resembles something without claiming the resemblance as proof. Science often lives in those careful little phrases. They may sound less thrilling, but they protect us from being carried away by our own vocabulary. A fossil can look like a tool. A concretion can look like a cannonball. A mineral growth can look like a screw. A weathered rock can look like a face. A root cast can look like a pipe. The eye offers a comparison. Evidence decides what the thing is. The Baigong formations appear to have entered popular culture at the comparison stage and were then promoted as if the decision had already been made. That is how many out-of-place artifact stories begin. They are not always born from fraud or foolishness. Sometimes they are born from a resemblance that nobody slowed down enough to translate properly. It is also worth noticing that the objects did not come with the usual supporting signs of a technological site. If ancient engineers had built a system of metal pipes, we might expect associated artifacts, worked surfaces, consistent pipe manufacture, junctions, tools, smelting remains, habitation traces, structural ruins, or at least some pattern that makes engineering more likely than geology. Instead, the Baigong case rests heavily on appearance, location, and reported chemical content. Those can be interesting, but they are not enough to overturn human history. This is not being unfair to the mystery. It is giving the mystery the respect of standards. If a claim asks us to rewrite the past, it should bring more than rusty-looking shapes and a dramatic setting. It should bring evidence that cannot be explained more simply by known natural processes. And known natural processes are not dull here. In fact, they are rather elegant. Imagine a wetter, ancient Qinghai, with vegetation where now the land feels dry and open. Trees or shrubs send roots into sediment. Floods or changing lake conditions bury those roots. Over time, groundwater moves through the buried material, carrying dissolved minerals. Iron compounds gather, react, and harden. The softer organic centre decays away, leaving hollow spaces or mineral outlines. More sediment accumulates. Pressure and cementation turn the deposits into rock. Later uplift, erosion, and weathering expose the ancient root shapes in the side of a hill or cave-like opening. To someone arriving much later, with modern pipes in mind, the result looks startlingly familiar. But it is not an object out of time. It is time itself made visible through a shape we happen to recognise. There is something quietly funny about the fact that an old root can impersonate plumbing so well. A tree, after all, is already full of tubes. It moves water from roots to leaves through xylem and sugars through phloem. A living plant is a hydraulic system made by evolution rather than engineering. So when roots become mineralised and later appear as hollow cylinders, they are not as far from pipes as they seem. They were part of a natural transport system from the beginning. They carried water, just not in the way imagined by stories of the ancient machinery. In that sense, the Baigong pipes may really have moved water once, but as roots in soil, not as metal conduits in a prehistoric facility. That is the sort of twist nature seems to enjoy. The explanation removes the aliens but leaves the plumbing joke intact. Still, the material details remain important because they show why the story was tempting. Iron-rich, hollow, cylindrical formations in a remote cave near a lake are unusual enough to deserve attention. They are not nothing. Skepticism should not flatten them into boredom. The people who first looked at them and wondered were responding to genuinely interesting forms. The error came later when interesting became impossible, and impossible became a ready-made doorway to whatever explanation felt most exciting. A better response is to keep the interest and let go of the exaggeration. These formations can be worth discussing as geological curiosities without needing to be machines from a lost age. Wonder does not have to wear a space helmet. The Baigong pipes also remind us that the boundary between artifact and geofact can be surprisingly slippery. Archaeologists and geologists often have to distinguish human-made objects from naturally formed ones. A chipped stone may be a tool or a naturally broken rock. A circular mark may be a post hole or a root trace. A straight line may be a wall or a fracture. Context is everything. So a repetition, material, associated evidence and formation process. The Baigong objects became famous because they were interpreted through the artifact lens first. But when placed back into geological context, they look much more comfortable as geofacts, natural formations that resemble artifacts. That category is not a consolation prize. It is a very real and important category, because the Earth produces imitations so convincing that humans have been arguing with them for centuries. By the time the story reached a global audience, many people had already received the simplified version. Metal pipes were found in a mountain, but humans did not exist there yet. That sentence is powerful because it leaves out all the softening details: pipe-like, reported, iron-rich, natural cement, variable shape, possible root casts. It also skips the possibility that the dating refers to natural material rather than manufacture. But the full story is not a single clean contradiction. It is a layered case in which objects that looked artificial were gradually reinterpreted as natural, after analyses suggested ordinary minerals and plant-related origins. The more closely we look, the less the Baigong pipes resemble a technological system, and the more they resemble a geological memory of an older environment. So what was actually found? Not proof of pre-human metalworking, not a confirmed alien installation, not a neat network of industrial pipes waiting under the mountain like an abandoned boiler room. What was found, or at least what was reported and later discussed, was a set of pipe-like formations, reddish and iron-rich in appearance, some hollow or cylindrical, embedded in or scattered around rock near Baigong Mountain and Tuosu Lake. Some were large enough to seem striking, some were small and fragmentary. Chemical reports pointed to common oxides and mineral components. Later scientific discussion favoured natural origins, especially fossilized root casts or iron-rich sedimentary formations shaped by geological processes. That may be less sensational than the first version, but it is much better grounded. And in a quiet way, it is still strange enough, because the real object at the centre of this story is not just a tube in stone, it is the moment of recognition. It is the instant when a natural shape crosses into a human category and becomes suspicious. The Baigong formations made people think of pipes, because they looked enough like pipes to wake up that part of the brain. Once awake, that part of the brain wanted purpose, maker, and story. It wanted to know what flowed through them. It wanted to know why they were there. It wanted a hidden civilization, or visitors from above, or a timeline with a secret fold in it. Those wants are not shameful. They are part of curiosity. But the objects themselves, rust-coloured and silent in the stone, do not become more truthful because we ask them to be more dramatic, and there is a deeper lesson tucked into the material itself. Iron, silica, calcium, carbon, plant traces, hollow spaces, roots, sediment, water, and time are enough to make something that can fool the modern eye. That should not disappoint us. It should make us more attentive. The Earth is not a passive background waiting for humans to leave interesting things behind. It is an active maker of forms. It builds, buries, stains, hollows, cements, and reveals. Sometimes its work resembles our own, not because it copied us, but because both nature and technology often solve problems through similar shapes. Tubes are useful: branches, roots, blood vessels, lava tubes, worm burrows, mineral veins, and human pipes all use or create tubular forms for different reasons. A cylinder is not a signature, it is a common solution. From here, the most dramatic claim in the Baigong story begins to come into clearer view. It is not enough to say that pipe-like shapes were found. The claim that made the world pay attention was that they were metal, ancient and impossible within known human history. That is the leap that turned a geological curiosity into a supposed out-of-place artifact. And like many leaps, it looks impressive from a distance, but when we walk up to the edge and inspect the ground, we may find that several stones are missing. The next thing to examine is how this claim of impossible age took hold, why it sounded so persuasive, and what happens when a rusty-looking formation is asked to carry the weight of rewriting civilization itself. The claim that made the Baigong pipes famous was not simply that strange tube-like shapes had been found in stone. Strange shapes in stone are everywhere, if one is willing to look closely enough and perhaps squint a little. The claim that made people pause, click, argue, and pass the story along was much stronger. It was the idea that these were metal pipes, possibly around 150,000 years old, embedded in a remote mountain landscape where no known human society should have been capable of making anything like them. In some popular versions, the problem became even sharper. The pipes were said to be older than human presence in the region, older than metallurgy, older than settled civilization, older than the entire technological story we usually tell about ourselves. That is the moment the Baigong story stopped being a local geological curiosity and became something larger. Because if a manufactured metal pipe truly comes from a time before people could have made metal pipes, then the past has suddenly become a very untidy cupboard. It is easy to understand why this idea travelled so quickly. A rusty tube in rock is interesting. A rusty tube in rock dated to 150,000 years ago is startling. A rusty tube in rock dated to 150,000 years ago, in a place where humans are said to have arrived much later, is the kind of sentence that seems to lean across the table and whisper, "Something is wrong with history." And most of us, whether we admit it or not, are a little vulnerable to that whisper. We like the possibility that the official story has missed a hidden page. We like the thought that somewhere in the desert, under a mountain beside a quiet lake, there may be evidence that the world was once stranger than the textbooks allowed. It is the same feeling that makes old maps, sealed tombs, sunken ruins and locked doors so powerful. They suggest that the past is not finished with us yet. The number itself, 150,000 years, gives the story much of its force. It is long enough to feel almost unreachable, but not so long that it becomes meaningless. Say something is 500 million years old, and the mind places it in the deep geological distance, with trilobites, ancient seas, and rocks minding their own business before mammals had even had a proper meeting. Say something is 150,000 years old, and it comes closer to us. It overlaps with the age of early modern humans, with Ice Age landscapes, with hunters, fires, stone tools, migrations, and the slow unfolding of our species. But metal pipes do not belong there. They belong to mines, furnaces, workshops, cities, plumbing systems, boilers, factories, and very occasionally to that one cupboard under the sink that everyone is afraid to open. So the number and the object clash. The date says deep prehistory, the shape says industry. The mind does not enjoy that mismatch, and so it reaches for an explanation big enough to hold both. This is where the phrase out-of-place artifact often enters the room, usually with a confident expression and a slightly dramatic coat. An out-of-place artifact, often shortened to OOP art, is something said to appear in the wrong historical or geological context. A modern-looking object in ancient rock, a tool where no tool should be, a machine part before machines, a footprint where no foot should have walked. The Baigong pipes have often been placed in that category by popular writers because they seem, at first glance, to have the right ingredients: apparent technology, surprising age, remote location, and an uncomfortable fit with known history. Some popular accounts repeated that thermoluminescence testing gave an age of about 150,000 years, and that human activity in the region was much more recent, creating the impression of a severe contradiction. But here is where the story needs to slow down, not stop. Just slow down enough to avoid tripping over its own excitement. A date attached to a material does not automatically tell us that the material was manufactured on that date. A mineral inside a formation may be old. The surrounding sediment may be old. The last exposure of certain crystalline minerals to sunlight or heat may be old. Thermoluminescence, the dating method often mentioned in connection with the Baigong pipes, is used to estimate when certain mineral grains were last exposed to heat or sunlight. That can be extremely useful in the right context, but it does not by itself identify an object as artificial, nor does it prove that a pipe-like shape was smelted, engineered, installed, or used by a maker. If the object is natural, then its age is not a problem. Rocks are allowed to be old. They have been doing it professionally for quite some time. This is a subtle but very important distinction, and the dramatic version of the Baigong story often slides past it. The claim depends on two separate ideas being true at the same time. First, that the structures are manufactured metal pipes. Second, that they are extremely old. If either one fails, the astonishing conclusion begins to wobble. An old natural formation is not a technological mystery. A modern pipe in an old-looking landscape is not a prehistoric mystery. The extraordinary claim needs both, manufactured and ancient. That is why careful investigators focus first on what the objects are made of, how they formed, and whether they show signs of manufacture. Age alone cannot carry the whole load. A stone can be older than humanity, without being evidence of someone before humanity. Otherwise, every pebble would be a very small alien artifact, which would make walking on a beach unnecessarily stressful. The word metal also deserves careful handling. The popular version often says metal pipes, or iron pipes, which makes the object sound like corroded manufactured iron. But the reported chemical information is less straightforward. Analyses describe material containing ferric oxide, silicon dioxide, and calcium oxide, which can sound technical and impressive, especially when paired with words like unknown composition. Yet ferric oxide is oxidized iron, common in red and brown rocks. Silicon dioxide is the basis of quartz and common sand. Calcium-bearing compounds are also ordinary in geological settings. A sample containing these things does not automatically become a smelted pipe. It may be iron-rich cemented sediment, mineralized material, pyrite-bearing formation, calcite-rich rock, or another natural mixture. Some later scientific discussion described the pipe-like features as varying widely in size and shape, and being largely composed of naturally occurring carbon and pyrite cements, with fossilized root casts considered the most likely explanation by scientists cited in a Shinmin weekly report. That does not mean the people who first found the formations were silly for thinking they looked metallic. The colour and shape would have encouraged that impression. Red-brown iron staining is a very persuasive costume. It can make a stone look as if it has spent decades in the rain beside a railway line. Hollow cylindrical shapes only add to the effect. If you hold a rust-coloured tube in your hand, or see one protruding from stone, you do not naturally think, what a splendid example of mineral cementation around a decayed organic structure. You think, that looks like an old pipe. And in ordinary life, that would probably be right. In ordinary life, when something looks like a pipe, it often is a pipe. But geology is not ordinary life. Geology is what happens when ordinary shapes are given millions of years, pressure, chemistry, and no concern whatsoever for human expectations. The before humans part of the claim is also more slippery than it sounds. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, but their presence in different regions at different times is a much more specific question. Human occupation in one part of the world does not mean metalworking existed there. Early humans could make stone tools, control fire, hunt, travel, adapt, and survive in difficult environments, but smelting and pipe making belong to a far later technological world. So when the Baigong story says humans did not exist yet, or humans in the region were only present much later, it is usually trying to emphasize that no known local people could have made an industrial-style pipe system at such an early date. That is reasonable as a challenge, but only if the objects are already proven to be industrial-style pipes. If they are not, then the human timeline is being asked to answer a question geology has already solved. This kind of claim is powerful because it turns uncertainty into a fork in the road. Either history is wrong or the object is misunderstood. Those are the two broad possibilities, and because history is wrong sounds much more exciting, it often gets a head start. But the second possibility is much more common. The world is full of misunderstood objects, fossils mistaken for tools, mineral concretions mistaken for eggs, iron nodules mistaken for manufactured spheres, erosion patterns mistaken for carvings, natural glass mistaken for human artifacts. A shape crosses the border into familiarity, and the human imagination stamps it with a passport it may not deserve. The Baigong pipes fit this pattern very well. They look enough like pipes to invite a technological story, but the evidence needed to make that story stand is much heavier than appearance. If a genuine metal pipe from 150,000 years ago were found, the consequences would be enormous. It would not simply add a footnote to archaeology, it would shake multiple fields at once. Metallurgy would need to be rewritten. Human technological development would need a new timeline. The history of settlement in the region would need re-examination. The object would be studied by archaeologists, geologists, metallurgists, paleoanthropologists, chemists, and probably a few very tired museum curators who had thought they were only coming in for a normal Tuesday. It would need clear documentation, exact location, stratigraphic context, controlled sampling, repeated dating, microscopic analysis, metallurgical structure, evidence of smelting, manufacturing marks, associated artifacts, and independent confirmation. Extraordinary discoveries do happen, but they do not become accepted simply because they make a good sentence. They have to survive being looked at from every direction. That is not a flaw in science. It is one of its great comforts. A claim this large should be made to earn its place. If it is real, it can survive testing. If it cannot survive testing, then perhaps it was never the claim we thought it was. The Baigong pipes became famous in part because the dramatic claim arrived before the careful explanation became widely known. This happens often. Mystery travels faster than correction. A strange headline can cross the world while the cautious follow-up is still looking for its shoes. By the time scientists suggest natural explanations, many people have already formed an emotional attachment to the impossible version, and once a story has become a tiny monument in the imagination, people do not always enjoy watching someone arrive with a clipboard and a sample bag. There is a gentle irony here. The natural explanation is not actually boring. It only feels boring if the mind has already been promised ancient technology. Fossilized root casts, iron-rich cementation, and old environmental change are fascinating. They tell us that the landscape was once different, perhaps wetter, more vegetated, more alive in ways that the present dry scene does not immediately reveal. They suggest that roots grew through sediment, that minerals gathered around them, that organic matter decayed, that hollows remained, and that erosion later revealed those shapes in a way that resembled human objects. That is a story of transformation across time, of biology becoming geology, of life leaving behind a form that looks like machinery. It may not rewrite civilization, but it does rewrite the first glance, and sometimes that is enough. Still, the metal before humans claim had one thing natural explanations rarely have: drama. It offered conflict. It seemed to place official science on one side and a mysterious object on the other. It invited the listener to choose between the cautious experts and the thrilling possibility that everything we know is wrong. This is a very old storytelling structure, a hidden truth, a reluctant establishment, a forbidden discovery, a remote site, a number that does not fit, a material that seems too advanced. Once those pieces are arranged, the story almost tells itself. All it needs is a cave, and Baigong kindly provided one. The cave made the claim feel more deliberate. If the pipe-like features had been found scattered randomly across a hillside, they might still have attracted attention. But inside and around a cave near a lake, they seemed positioned. A cave can look like an entrance. A lake can look like a source. Pipes can look like infrastructure. Put them together and the imagination begins to build a facility. Perhaps the mountain was hollow. Perhaps the pipes led inside. Perhaps they drew water from the lake. Perhaps they cooled machinery. Perhaps they vented gas. Perhaps, in the boldest retellings, they belonged to a launch site or alien base. Notice how quickly the story moves from a tube in stone to a working system. This is not because the evidence forces that leap. It is because objects that resemble technology make us search for function, and function makes us search for builders. The phrase, "if they were indeed made by humans," appears in some more careful versions of the story, and it is doing a great deal of quiet work. It is a small condition placed beside a huge possibility. If they were made by humans, history would need re-evaluation. That is true enough. But the condition is the entire matter. If. The trouble is that once the sentence is repeated often enough, the if begins to fade. People remember the shocking part and forget the hinge. They remember 150,000-year-old pipes. They forget the uncertainty about whether they are pipes at all. The imagination edits for impact, which is helpful in storytelling and terrible in evidence handling. This is also why unknown material became such an attractive detail. Reports that a fraction of the analysed composition could not be identified were sometimes treated as if the material itself might be exotic. But unidentified in a limited analysis does not mean unearthly. It may mean the test was incomplete, the sample was mixed, the reporting was simplified, or the components were not specified in the version that reached the public. Science is full of unknowns, but not all unknowns point upward to the stars. Sometimes they point to a better lab report. Sometimes they point to a translator's shortcut. Sometimes they point to the simple fact that a rock is not politely organised for the convenience of headlines. The comparison with human technological history also needs care. Metalworking did not appear all at once as gleaming pipes and complex systems. It emerged gradually through the use of native metals, heating, hammering, smelting, alloying, casting and tool production over long periods. Pipes, especially durable metal pipes as part of an installation, imply not only knowledge of metal but an entire chain of supporting skills and needs. Mining or collecting ore, extracting metal, shaping it, joining pieces, designing a system, maintaining it, explaining why it was there, leaving traces. A single pipe is not only a pipe, it is the visible end of a whole technological iceberg. If the Baigong formations were truly manufactured, we would expect at least some sign of that iceberg. Instead, the strongest evidence appears to be resemblance and reported composition, both of which can be accounted for by natural processes. This does not mean that all mysteries of early human history are settled. They are not. Archaeology is constantly revised by new discoveries. Humans reached places earlier than once believed. They made art, tools, shelters, and journeys that continue to surprise researchers. The past is not a closed book, but revising history is different from abandoning standards. A new archaeological discovery usually comes with context. Layers, tools, bones, hearths, dates, comparisons, and repeated analysis. The Baigong pipes, as popularly presented, leap over that slow work. They begin with the most exciting conclusion and invite the evidence to catch up. It has not really managed to do so. Perhaps the reason the claim resonated so strongly is that metal carries a special meaning in our imagination. Stone belongs to nature and prehistory. Bone belongs to animals and ancient hunters. Clay belongs to early settlement. But metal feels like a threshold. It marks the move into advanced technology, into heat powerful enough to change material, into craft, warfare, trade, machines, and cities. To find metal where it does not belong feels more disruptive than finding a strange stone. A stone might be natural, metal feels intentional. So, metal before humans is not just a technical claim, it is a symbolic one. It says the boundary between nature and technology has been crossed in the wrong era. No wonder people listened. Yet the Baigong case gently reminds us that iron in nature is not the same as iron in industry. The red planet Mars is red because of iron oxides, and nobody needs to imagine Martian plumbers for that, tempting though it may be at certain hours of the evening. Earth is full of iron-rich minerals, rusty soils, and reddish rocks. Pyrite, hematite, limonite, and other iron-bearing materials can create textures and colours that feel metallic. Under the right conditions, they can cement sediments around organic forms. The result may be hard, rusty, and tube-like. It may look like metal while being geological. That is the key. The appearance of metal is not proof of metalworking, and iron content is not proof of manufacture. Once this becomes clear, the famous claim begins to change shape. Instead of metal pipes were found before humans existed, we get something more careful and less explosive. Iron-rich, pipe-like natural formations were reported near Baigong Mountain, and some dating or age claims were interpreted dramatically before the natural origin was fully appreciated. That sentence will never win a contest for thrilling headlines. It is too careful, too patient, and it refuses to knock over the furniture. But it is much closer to the evidence, and there is a quiet pleasure in that. The truth does not always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with mineral chemistry, a root cast, and a reminder that the earth can make familiar shapes in unfamiliar ways. Still, one should not be too harsh on the people drawn to the dramatic version. It is a wonderfully human mistake. We see a shape from our own world and carry our world backward into deep time. We know pipes, so we imagine pipes. We know systems, so we imagine systems. We know machines, so we imagine machines. The Baigong formations became a mirror, reflecting our own technological habits back at us from a stone face in Qinghai. A tree root becomes a pipe because we live in a pipe-making civilization. An iron stain becomes rust because we live among rusting things. A cave becomes a chamber because we build rooms. The mystery is not only in the mountain. It is in the way the modern mind enters the mountain and immediately starts furnishing it. That is why the claim made everyone listen. It did not merely ask, what are these formations? It asked, what if everything is older than we think? What if someone was here before us? What if technology appeared, vanished, and left only a few stubborn tubes in stone? Those are large questions, and large questions have a way of making evidence feel larger too. But the size of a question does not determine the strength of an answer. The Baigong pipes may not be ancient metal technology, but they show how easily a real object can become a doorway to a much bigger story. They show how one uncertain date, one familiar shape, and one remote landscape can combine into a claim powerful enough to travel around the world. And once a story reaches that point, it rarely remains a simple geological puzzle. It gathers company. Lost civilizations arrive first, carrying maps and warnings. Then ancient astronauts step in, usually with excellent timing. Then come the theories about hidden facilities, forgotten science, suppressed evidence, and visitors who cross the stars only to leave behind something that looks suspiciously like drainage hardware. The Baigong pipes were perfectly shaped for that next stage, not because the evidence demanded it, but because the claim had opened a door that imagination was very eager to walk through. Once the Baigong pipes were described as ancient, metallic, and out of place, the story almost had no choice but to grow wings. A strange geological feature can sit quietly in a local report for years, without troubling anyone beyond a few specialists and curious travellers. But call it evidence of technology before known civilization, and suddenly it stops being a local curiosity. It becomes a doorway. People begin to look through it, and see whatever kind of hidden past they already suspected might be there. Some see a lost civilization, clever enough to work metal in an age when our ancestors were still living by firelight and stone tools. Others see visitors from beyond Earth, not necessarily arriving with dramatic music and glowing saucers, but perhaps with machines, surveys, and reasons of their own. Others are less specific. They simply feel that the official story of history must be incomplete. And here, in the dry landscape of Qinghai, is one more stubborn object that seems to agree with them. This is the stage where the Baigong pipes became more than formations in rock. They became evidence in search of a case. That is a very different thing. A formation in rock asks, how did this happen? Evidence in search of a case asks, which large theory can I help prove? The moment a mystery is placed inside a bigger belief system, it begins to behave differently. Every detail becomes meaningful. The remote location becomes secrecy. The cave becomes an entrance. The lake becomes a reservoir. The red-brown colour becomes corroded metal. The reported age becomes suppressed history. Even the lack of ordinary artefacts nearby can be turned into support, because perhaps the site was cleaned, abandoned, buried, or hidden by time. A story can become so flexible that nothing can really challenge it, which is convenient for storytelling and rather less convenient for finding out what actually happened. The ancient alien version is probably the most famous because it is the most dramatic. It imagines that the pipe-like structures near Baigong Mountain may be the remains of some extraterrestrial installation, perhaps a base, a launch site, a laboratory, or a system connected to the nearby lake. It's not hard to see how this idea formed. A remote mountain with cave openings already feels like a natural stage for secret activity. Add strange tubes, rusty-looking material, and a claim that humans could not have made them, and the mind reaches for the next available builder. If humans are ruled out, then perhaps non-humans step in. The reasoning sounds tidy at first, almost like a little equation written on a napkin. Pipes require makers. Humans were not there. Therefore the makers came from somewhere else. It is neat, memorable, and very useful if one is trying to keep people watching after midnight. But that little equation has a wobbly middle. It assumes that the objects are pipes in the first place. It assumes they required makers. It assumes that if known humans didn't make them, no natural process could have done so. And it assumes that an unknown maker is more likely to be a visitor from space than an ordinary geological process wearing a convincing disguise. That is quite a lot to ask of a rusty-looking shape in stone. This is not to mock the imagination. The imagination is doing what it does best. It is connecting pieces, filling gaps, and asking whether the world might be bigger than it looks. But imagination needs evidence the way a lantern needs oil. Without it, the flame may still flicker for a while, but it cannot guide us very far. The Lost Civilization version is softer than the Alien version, and in some ways more tempting. It does not require visitors crossing interstellar distances only to leave behind what looks like plumbing. It suggests instead that humans, or human-like people, developed advanced knowledge far earlier than we currently believe, then vanished without leaving the kinds of evidence archaeologists normally expect. This idea has deep appeal because it leaves us within the human story. It says not that strangers came from the stars, but that our own past may be grander, stranger, and more tragic than we remember. A forgotten people worked metal. They built systems. They understood things we later lost. Their cities turned to dust. Their tools disappeared. Only a few traces remained, and one of them may have surfaced near a quiet lake in Qinghai. It is a powerful idea because loss is believable. Civilizations really do collapse. Cities really are abandoned. Languages vanish. Technologies can be forgotten in local contexts. Archaeologists do sometimes find older dates than expected, surprising trade routes, sophisticated ancient engineering, and human activity in places once thought unoccupied. The past is not a simple staircase where every step is neatly labelled and nobody ever moves sideways. It is messy. It contains gaps. It is revised constantly by new finds. So the idea of lost complexity is not absurd by itself. Human history has produced many remarkable things, and some of them were underestimated for a long time. The problem comes when that reasonable openness is used as a shortcut around evidence. A lost civilization is possible in the broad sense, but a specific lost civilization with metal pipes in Qinghai 150,000 years ago needs specific proof. Without that proof, the idea floats above the site rather than resting on it. There is also a difference between an earlier than expected human achievement and a completely unsupported technological leap. If researchers discover that people reached a region thousands of years earlier than once believed, that may be surprising, but it fits within the wider pattern of migration, adaptation, and archaeology. If researchers find that people made a certain tool earlier than expected, that can be a major discovery. but it still comes with layers, dates, residues, tool marks, and comparisons. Metal pipes from an extremely ancient period are not a small adjustment. They imply mining, metallurgy, engineering, planning, and some practical purpose for a pipe system. They also imply a surrounding technological culture capable of making and maintaining such objects. That culture should leave other traces: tools, waste material, hearths, workshops, settlement remains, altered surfaces, paths, quarrying, smelting byproducts, something. Ancient industry is not usually polite enough to leave only one mysterious clue and then sweep up after itself. This is one reason the Baigong pipes became useful to people who already liked the idea of hidden prehistory. They seemed to offer a single object that could stand in for a missing world. Instead of needing the whole lost civilization, one could point to the pipes and say, "Here is the clue." But a single unclear object cannot safely carry that much weight. It is like trying to prove the existence of a vanished library because you found something that looks a little like a bookmark. Perhaps it is a bookmark. Perhaps it is a leaf. Perhaps it is a scrap of packaging from last Tuesday. The claim cannot outrun the object, and in Baigong's case, the object itself keeps pulling us back toward geology. Still, the temptation is understandable. Human beings are strongly drawn to mismatches. We notice things that do not seem to belong. A modern object in an ancient setting, a precise shape in a natural landscape, a strange mark on a stone, a map that seems too accurate, a carved line where none should be. These mismatches create a little mental itch, and we want to scratch it. Ordinary explanations can feel unsatisfying because they reduce the itch too quickly. The dramatic explanation lets us keep scratching. It opens more doors. It suggests that the world is deeper, stranger, perhaps even deliberately concealed. That feeling can be enjoyable, especially when the mystery is safely distant. A pipe-like formation in Qinghai can be exciting from a sofa. It is less fun if the mystery is why the actual pipes in your own house are making that sound again. The internet has made this process faster. A story like the Baigong pipes no longer needs a careful book, a museum display, or a long academic debate to reach a global audience. It needs a good title, a few photographs, and a claim sharp enough to catch attention. Metal pipes found before humans existed is almost perfect for this purpose. It is short, it is visual, it seems impossible, it invites disagreement. People who believe it share it because it feels like hidden truth. People who doubt it share it because they want to correct it. Either way the story travels, the mystery becomes more famous with every argument, and the quiet, natural explanation, being less dramatic, has to walk behind carrying the luggage. This is not new. Long before the internet, people were already fascinated by unusual artifacts and supposed remnants of impossible technology. Objects like the Antikythera mechanism, which really was an ancient Greek-geared device of astonishing sophistication, show that ancient people could create remarkable technology. But the Antikythera mechanism is also a useful contrast. It was recovered from a shipwreck, studied physically, compared with the inscriptions, examined with imaging, and placed within a broader context of Hellenistic astronomy and craftsmanship. Its strangeness did not protect it from study. Study made it more interesting. Real surprises become stronger under examination. Weak mysteries often become vaguer. Other famous supposed out-of-place artifacts have followed a different path. A natural concretion is called a machine part. A modern object is said to be trapped in ancient coal. A carved-looking stone is treated as proof of lost technology. A fossil shape becomes a human footprint beside dinosaurs. Sometimes these claims collapse when the object is examined carefully. Sometimes the original context is missing. Sometimes the story changes with each retelling until the earliest version is almost impossible to recover. The Baigong pipes belong to this wider family of claims, but they are especially instructive because they sit right on the border between resemblance and interpretation. They do look odd enough to start a conversation. They do not, from the available evidence, justify the grand conclusions built around them. The ancient alien interpretation has another special appeal because it removes the need to fit the object into human development. If an object seems too advanced for humans, aliens can supply the missing technology without requiring a local archaeological record. This makes the theory flexible. Too advanced. Aliens. Too isolated. Aliens landed there. No tools nearby. They took them away. No other signs. They were careful. The more evidence is missing, the more the story can describe the visitors as secretive, temporary, or so advanced that ordinary traces would not remain. That kind of explanation can be very hard to disprove because it is shaped to avoid leaving handles. But good explanations should have handles. They should make predictions, invite tests, and risk being wrong. A theory that can explain every possible absence often explains nothing very securely. There is also the practical awkwardness of the alien pipe idea. If a civilization could travel across interstellar distances, or even move through our solar system with advanced machines, what exactly would it be doing installing iron-like pipes in a mountain near a lake? Perhaps it needed water. Perhaps it was mining. Perhaps it was observing Earth. These are possible in the loose way that many things are possible when we are inventing scenarios. But the material evidence would need to show something far stranger than iron-rich natural tubes. We might expect unusual alloys, artificial structures, machining marks, residues unlike local geology, clear layout, or associated objects that cannot be explained naturally. The Baigong formations do not appear to provide that. The theory arrives because the story leaves a gap, not because the evidence points upward with any particular confidence. Lost civilization theories face their own practical problem. A society capable of making metal pipes would be part of a larger cultural and technological system. It would need knowledge transmission, labour, tools, resource gathering, and probably a reason to be in that location. Even if every building vanished, even if climate and erosion destroyed much, the ground would likely retain some traces. Ancient humans were not ghosts. They broke stones, burned fuel, ate food, made waste, buried dead, left footprints in sediments, and changed the places where they lived. Archaeology is very good at finding small traces when they exist. A claim about a lost high-technology culture cannot rely only on one ambiguous kind of object while everything else remains silent. Silence does not make the theory impossible, but it makes it weak. And yet, these theories continue because they offer something emotionally satisfying. They turn uncertainty into story. A natural explanation says, this formation may have developed through mineralization around ancient roots. That is fascinating if you are willing to slow down. But it does not immediately give us characters, motives, danger, secrecy, or grandeur. An alien installation gives us visitors, purpose, technology, and a hidden past. A lost civilization gives us rise, achievement, collapse, and memory. These are stories with human shape. We understand them instinctively. Geology has no villain, no hero, no dramatic reveal at the end of the tunnel. It has processes, it has time, it has chemistry doing its patient work in the dark. For a restless mind, that can feel less satisfying, even when it is true. This is why the temptation of mystery should not be treated as stupidity. It is a normal part of being human. We are meaning-making animals. We like causes. We like agents. If something looks made, we look for a maker. If something seems out of place, we ask who placed it there. These instincts are useful most of the time. If you find a sharpened blade on the ground, it is sensible to assume someone made it. If you find a stack of stones in a field, it may be natural, but it may also be a marker. If you hear a strange sound in your house at night, you do not begin with a lecture on thermal expansion, though sometimes that is exactly what it is. You listen, you wonder, you imagine. Curiosity begins before analysis. The danger is not wonder. The danger is certainty arriving too early. A person can enjoy the possibility of ancient aliens without pretending the evidence is stronger than it is. a person can imagine lost civilizations while still asking where the tools, settlements, dates, and materials are. A person can look at the Baigong pipes and say, "That is genuinely strange looking," without leaping to, "Therefore, everything archaeologists know is wrong." Good curiosity has patience built into it. It lets the mystery remain open long enough for better questions to form. Poor curiosity wants the biggest answer immediately, then becomes annoyed when the evidence asks for a smaller one. The Baigong pipes also show how remote landscapes become screens for projection. A place many viewers have never visited is easier to fill with imagined details. Qinghai becomes not a lived region with roads, towns, histories, local communities, tourism, geology and scientific context, but a vast empty stage where anything might have happened. This is common in mystery storytelling. The desert, the jungle, the polar ice, the deep ocean, the high plateau, all are used as places where ordinary rules might loosen. Remote does not mean impossible. Remote does not mean unstudied. Remote does not mean outside natural law. But in popular imagination, distance creates permission. The farther a place is from everyday experience, the easier it becomes to believe it may contain everyday impossibilities. There is a responsibility here, especially when telling stories about real places. It is easy to treat a remote landscape as merely a backdrop for fantasy, but real people live in and around these regions. Real scientists study them. Real histories belong to them. A mystery can be enjoyed without turning a place into a blank canvas. The Baigong story is not just somewhere in China where aliens may have left pipes. It belongs to a specific landscape near Delingha and Tuosu Lake, in a region shaped by Tibetan plateau geology, basin environments, changing climates, local tourism, and human communities. The more specific we become, the less room there is for vague spectacle, but the more room there is for real understanding. The lost civilization angle can also accidentally underestimate ancient people in a strange way. It often begins by saying that known ancient humans could not have done something, then leaps to a hidden advanced group or aliens. But human history is already impressive without needing impossible additions. People crossed seas, survived ice ages, painted caves, built monuments, tracked stars, shaped landscapes, domesticated plants and animals, invented writing, developed metallurgy, created calendars, and learned to live in places that would make most modern people complain within an hour. We do not need to grant them 150,000-year-old metal pipe systems to respect their intelligence. In fact, adding unsupported technologies can distract from the real achievements that are well evidenced and extraordinary enough. There is also a kind of impatience in many fringe histories. They want the grand conclusion without the slow accumulation of evidence. Archaeology and geology both require patience. A layer must be understood, a sample must be taken carefully, a date must be interpreted in context, a composition must be compared, a shape must be examined against natural processes. This can seem slow compared with the quick thrill of a mystery headline. But slowness is the price of reliability. The earth is old, evidence is fragile, and the past does not speak in complete sentences. If we rush, we mostly hear our own voices echoing back from the cave wall. That cave wall in the Baigong story has carried quite a lot. It has supported aliens, lost civilizations, tourism, skepticism, geological explanation, online arguments, and countless retellings. The actual formations remain quieter than all of that. They do not insist on being machines. They do not announce themselves as roots either. They simply exist as material features in a landscape, waiting for people to do the difficult work of interpretation. This is one of the pleasant lessons of physical evidence. It is stubborn. It can be misnamed, overhyped, photographed from dramatic angles, and placed under exciting titles. But eventually someone has to ask what it is made of and how it sits in the rock. When the ancient alien and lost civilization ideas are set aside, not dismissed with a laugh, but set carefully aside because they have not earned the weight placed on them, the mystery does not vanish. It changes scale. Instead of asking whether visitors from the stars installed pipes in Qinghai, we ask how natural cylindrical forms can develop in sediment. Instead of asking where the missing civilization went, we ask what older environment left traces beneath a modern dry landscape. Instead of asking why history is wrong, we ask how stories become attached to objects. These questions are smaller in spectacle, but not in value. They are answerable. They lead somewhere. They let the Baigong pipes teach us about Earth rather than simply using them as props in a story about someone else. And this is where the temptation of mystery becomes most useful. It gets us to look. Many people who would never click on a lecture about iron-rich root casts or sedimentary concretions will happily listen to a story about ancient pipes that should not exist. The mystery opens the door. The responsibility of a good explanation is not to slam that door shut, but to walk through it with a lantern and point out what is actually there. The first room may contain aliens in the imagination, but the next room contains minerals, roots, water, and time. That is not a failure of wonder. That is wonder maturing into attention. So the Baigong pipes became famous because they offered a tempting choice. On one side, a dramatic hidden history, ancient astronauts, forgotten engineers, machines before memory. On the other side, a slower natural story, iron-rich formations, fossilized roots, sediment, erosion, and misunderstanding. The first is easier to sell. The second is easier to test. And in the long run, the testable story tends to be the one that remains after the excitement has had its walk around the room. But before the geological explanation could take hold, someone had to arrive with the less glamorous tools of investigation, samples, comparisons, mineral analysis, and the willingness to disappoint anyone who had already booked the aliens for the evening. By the time geologists enter a mystery like the Baigong pipes, the story has usually already had a very good time without them. It has travelled through articles, conversations, videos, late-night searches, and the minds of people who enjoy the thought that something deeply unusual might be waiting in a remote place, with a name they had never heard before. By then, the rusty tubes are no longer simply strange shapes near a lake. They have become possible evidence of ancient technology, perhaps a lost human civilization, perhaps visitors from somewhere beyond Earth, perhaps a secret that has been sitting in a mountain while the rest of history went about its business. Then the geologists arrive, and one can almost hear the excitement in the room take a polite little step backward. This is not because geologists dislike wonder. Quite the opposite, really. A good geologist is usually someone who can look at a dull brown rock for 20 minutes and find it more thrilling than most people find fireworks. They are not enemies of mystery. They simply have a habit of asking questions that are less dramatic and more useful. What is the structure made of? How does it relate to the surrounding rock? Does it cut through the layers or follow them? Is it made of metal, mineral cement, fossil material, or altered sediment? Are there tool marks? Are there signs of heating, casting, smelting, drilling, shaping, joining, or installation? Does the object show consistency, or does it vary like something formed by natural processes? Is the hollow interior really a pipe bore, or is it the space left behind by something that decayed? These are not the sort of questions that make a trailer more exciting, but they are the ones that decide whether a mystery is a doorway into a rewritten past, or a reminder that nature is very good at impressions. In the Baigong case, the first job is to reduce the claim back down to the material. This sounds almost rude after so much imagination has been invited to the gathering, but it is necessary. A pipe-like object cannot be understood only by the feeling it gives us. It has to be treated as a physical thing. If someone says it is metal, a sample should reveal metal in the manufactured sense, not just iron compounds in rock. If someone says it is artificial, the structure should show signs of artificial manufacture. If someone says it is part of a system, the pieces should relate to each other in a way that makes functional sense. If someone says it is older than human technology, the dating method and what exactly is being dated must be very clear. Otherwise, we're not investigating an object. We're investigating a sentence about an object, and sentences can be much more slippery than stones. The geologist's approach begins with the setting. The formations are not lying on a clean laboratory table with labels tied neatly around them. They are part of a landscape, a mountain face, cave openings, lake shore, sedimentary material, iron-stained surfaces, and a basin with its own long environmental history. Context matters because natural formations do not appear from nowhere. They form inside systems. If the tubes are embedded in sandstone or sedimentary layers, that tells us something. If they follow cracks or root patterns, that tells us something else. If they are surrounded by minerals that indicate groundwater movement, that matters. If they occur near an old lake environment with sediment that may once have held vegetation, that becomes important too. The object and the place are not separate witnesses. They are part of the same testimony. This is one of the ways science quietly spoils the more dramatic fun. It refuses to treat the object as if it has been dropped into the landscape from outside the story. Ancient alien versions often imagine the pipe-like formations as installed hardware, as if they were brought to the mountain and fitted into place. Lost Civilization versions do something similar, but geology asks whether the mountain itself made them, or at least whether the sediment that became part of the mountain formed around something organic long before the cave looked the way it does now. This is a less theatrical possibility, but it has one strong advantage. It fits with many known processes, and known processes, when they explain the evidence, are not boring. They are doing exactly what explanations are supposed to do. A sample from a suspected artificial pipe would be expected to tell a very different story from a sample of mineralized sediment. Manufactured metal often has structure. It may contain alloys, impurities from smelting, patterns from casting or working, evidence of heating, or microscopic signs of human processing. Even ancient metal objects usually carry traces of how they were made. Natural iron-rich formations, by contrast, can contain iron oxides, silica, calcium compounds, pyrite, carbon-rich material, and other minerals arranged by groundwater, sediment chemistry, and biological decay. To a casual observer, both may look rusty and hard. To analysis, they are not the same thing. Rust colour is only an introduction. It is not a passport. This distinction is where many mysteries begin to lose their borrowed glamour. The Baigong formations were widely described as metal pipes, but reports and later discussions pointed toward material that did not behave like clean manufactured iron. Iron oxide in a sample is not shocking. It is the reason so many rocks look red, brown, or yellow. Silicon dioxide is common in sand and quartz-rich sediment. Calcium-bearing compounds are common in sedimentary environments. Carbon can be associated with organic remains. Pyrite can form naturally. None of these ingredients requires a workshop, an ancient engineer, or a visitor from a star system with a worrying interest in drainage. They require chemistry, water, sediment, organic matter, and time. Earth has all of those in generous supply. The geologists also look at shape, but not in the same way the first excited observer does. To the excited observer, a cylinder is already suspicious. To the geologist, a cylinder is common. Tubes occur throughout nature. Roots are tubes. Burrows are tubes. Lava can make tubes. Water can carve channels. Minerals can line cavities. Gas bubbles can leave rounded spaces. Cracks can be enlarged and filled. Organic structures can be replaced by minerals. Sediment can harden around long decaying forms. The question is not, does this look like a pipe? The question is, which process can make a tube like this in this material, in this setting? That is a much better question, though admittedly less likely to make anyone spill their tea. Natural cylinders can be surprisingly convincing. A tree root, for example, is already a pipe-like thing while it is alive. It carries water and nutrients. It branches. It narrows. It curves through soil in search of what it needs. If sediment buries it, and minerals gather around it, The root can become preserved as a cast or replace structure. The organic centre may decay away. Iron-rich minerals may stain or cement the outer part. Later, erosion may expose the form in a cave wall or hillside. To a person arriving thousands or millions of years later, the result may look like a manufactured tube. The resemblance is not imaginary. It is real enough to be misleading. Nature did not make a fake pipe. It made a preserved root form, and our pipe-making mind supplied the comparison. This is the moment when a geologist may gently ruin the alien base. The large tube is not necessarily a pipe installed by a maker. It may be a cast. The small tubes are not necessarily components of a system. They may be smaller roots or branches of the same process. The rusty surface is not necessarily corroded metal. It may be iron oxide staining. The cave is not necessarily an entrance to a structure. It may be an erosional opening exposing old sediment. The lake is not necessarily a reservoir attached to the pipes. It may be part of the environmental and chemical history that helped create or preserve the formations. Each dramatic feature remains real, but its meaning changes. The objects do not disappear. They stop pointing in the direction people first wanted them to point. There is a certain comedy in this, but also a kind of relief. The more extreme versions of the Baigong story ask us to imagine an enormous missing context. If the pipes are manufactured, where are the makers? Where are the tools? Where is the metalworking debris? Where are the settlements, the workshops, the smelting remains, the other artifacts, the altered surfaces, the structures that would make such a system useful? If the makers were aliens, where is the material evidence that exceeds local geology? Where are the alloys, residues, shapes and arrangements that cannot be explained by known natural processes? If the formations are natural, however, we do not need to invent a vanished technological world around them. We only need to understand the environment that formed them. That does not make the story less interesting. It makes it less crowded. This is why samples matter. The hammer, the hand lens, the thin section, the microscope, the chemical analysis, the comparison with other formations, these are the quiet tools that bring a mystery back to Earth. A geologist may cut a small piece, study its texture, examine how minerals are arranged, look for organic traces, compare it with root casts or concretions, and ask whether its structure matches natural formation. Under a microscope, the romance of a mystery can change shape very quickly. What looked like corroded metal from a distance may become mineral grains cemented together. What looked like a pipe wall may become a rind of iron-rich material around a former root channel. What looked like a uniform bore may become an irregular hollow left by decay. The story may still be strange, but now it has evidence under it. The phrase "spoiled fun" is tempting, but it's not entirely fair. Geologists do not spoil a mystery by explaining it. They spoil only the version that needed the mystery to remain blurry. If the fun depended on not looking too closely, then yes, analysis is bad news. But if the fun is in understanding how something came to be, then the arrival of science is the best part. It gives the object a history deeper than a headline. It connects the tube-like shapes to plants, sediments, minerals, water, and changing climates. It turns a single oddity into part of a larger system. The alien version may be larger in spectacle, but the geological version is larger in time. Consider what must happen for a natural pipe-like cast to form. A plant grows in an environment that allows roots to push into sediment. The root changes the chemistry around it. It creates a pathway for water, air, and organic compounds. Sediment buries the root. Groundwater moves through the surrounding material, carrying dissolved minerals. Iron, silica, calcium, and other substances become concentrated around the root or inside the spaces it leaves. The organic tissue decays, perhaps slowly, perhaps unevenly. A hollow remains or a mineralized outline preserves the shape. The sediment hardens, the landscape shifts, erosion cuts into the deposit. The formation is exposed. A human sees it and says, quite reasonably, "That looks like a pipe." There is no need for a factory. The factory was the environment itself, working slowly with materials already present. This explanation also helps with the variation in size. Real engineered pipe systems can have different sizes, of course, but variation in natural structures is expected. Roots branch from thick to thin. Some may run straight for a while, others curve, taper, or break. Some casts may be hollow, others may be filled. Some may survive erosion, others may crumble. If the Baigong formations include a mix of large and small tube-like pieces, that does not automatically suggest a complex installation. It may suggest a natural branching system, exposed in fragments. The more we think about roots, the less surprising the variety becomes. A tree or shrub root system is not tidy plumbing, but it is a network of tubes. It can leave behind exactly the kind of irregular, repeated forms that invite misunderstanding. There is also the matter of the surrounding rock. If a pipe-like feature formed naturally inside sediment, it should have a relationship with the layers around it. It may be enclosed by the same material. It may show mineral continuity. It may be affected by the same weathering. It may not cut cleanly across the rock as an inserted object would. A manufactured pipe placed into existing rock would often disturb that setting, unless it were installed with great care and then somehow sealed by later processes. A root cast, by contrast, belongs to the sediment from the beginning. It grew there or formed there as the sediment developed. Later, when everything hardened, the root trace became part of the rock's internal history. This is an important difference because an object that belongs to the rock does not require a builder outside it. When people hear that scientists found plant material or ring-like features in the Baigong samples, the alien story becomes harder to hold together. Plant traces are not impossible in an artificial object, but in this context they are a strong clue. If the structures preserve something related to roots, then the supposed pipe may be a biological form transformed by minerals. Tree rings or plant-related organic material fit naturally with a root cast explanation. They do not fit naturally with a prehistoric metal pipe unless we add more complications. Perhaps the pipe grew around a root. Perhaps roots invaded the pipe later. Perhaps contamination occurred. These are not impossible thoughts, but the simpler explanation begins to look much more attractive. The object may have looked like a pipe because it came from a root, and roots are nature's own quiet pipework. The dating issue also becomes calmer under geological inspection. A very old date no longer shocks us if we are dealing with natural material. In fact, old is exactly what we would expect. Sedimentary formations can be far older than human presence in a region. Mineralized root casts can be extremely ancient. Rock does not check whether humans are ready before it begins forming. So the statement, "These structures are older than known human technology," stops being a contradiction and becomes ordinary. Yes, they may be older. That is because they were not made by human technology. The mystery dissolves not because the date was meaningless, but because the object was misclassified. This is a common pattern in supposed impossible artifacts. The impossibility often sits at the junction of two claims, a familiar-looking object and an ancient context. If the object is truly a manufactured artifact, the ancient context is astonishing. If the object is natural, the ancient context is not astonishing at all. The Baigong pipes drew attention because the familiar-looking object was treated as manufactured too early. Geology walked in and asked whether that first classification was justified. The answer appears to be no, or at least not from the available evidence. That is where the large mystery loses its footing. Not in the age, not in the remoteness, not even in the strange appearance, but in the assumption that pipe-like means pipe. One can imagine the disappointment this caused in some corners. It is not hard to see why. A natural explanation can feel like being handed a cup of warm water when one expected a secret map. There is no conspiracy, no hidden base, no lost engineers standing proudly beside their ancient pipeline. Just minerals and old roots, doing slow work in sediment. But that disappointment belongs more to the expectation than to the explanation. The natural process is only dull if we refuse to picture it properly. a living plant in a landscape that no longer exists, its roots buried and chemically altered, its shape preserved through changes in climate, lake levels, sediment, mineral flow, erosion, and human interpretation, is not dull. It is a biography of Earth written in an object small enough to hold a rumour. The geologist's arrival also changes the moral of the story. In the fringe version, the moral is that science does not know everything and may be hiding or ignoring evidence. In the geological version, the moral is better. First impressions are powerful, and the Earth is more inventive than we assume. Science does not enter as a scolding parent. It enters as a method for separating what we see from what it means. That difference is crucial. Looking at the Baigong formations and saying they resemble pipes is fine. Looking at them and saying they're definitely manufactured metal pipes is a claim. Claims need support. When the support does not appear, the claim should be revised. That is not defeat. That is thinking. There is an important comfort in this. We do not have to choose between wonder and skepticism. The Baigong pipes allow both, if we handle them properly. Wonder notices the strange shapes in the mountain. Skepticism asks what they are made of. Wonder imagines old landscapes. Skepticism checks whether the minerals support that image. Wonder enjoys the possibility of the unknown. Skepticism makes sure the unknown is not just a familiar process wearing a mask. The two should not be enemies. Wonder without skepticism becomes gullible. Skepticism without wonder becomes dry and unpleasant, like a biscuit left out for several days. Together they let us stay curious without losing our way. The practical work of geologists may seem plain, but it is built for exactly these moments. They compare. They do not ask only whether a formation is unusual. They ask whether it resembles other known formations. Root casts, concretions, mineralized channels, iron-cemented tubes and sedimentary structures have been observed in many places. If Baigong's pipe-like forms match those patterns, then the mystery joins a family of natural phenomena rather than standing alone as a unique impossibility. This is how science reduces false astonishment without reducing real interest. It says, "This is not evidence of ancient industry, but it is an example of a known process in a striking setting." That is a quieter sentence, but a much sturdier one. Comparison is especially important because nature repeats shapes. It does not repeat them exactly, the way a machine might, but it returns to similar forms because similar physical conditions produce similar outcomes. Roots make branching tubes because that shape works for plants. Water makes channels because fluids follow paths. Minerals form bands and crusts because chemistry responds to gradients. Crystals form geometries because atoms arrange themselves under rules. Erosion makes arches, columns, hollows, and balanced stones because rock has weaknesses and weather has patience. Humans did not invent useful shapes. We borrowed many of them from a universe that had been making them all along. This is perhaps the larger embarrassment for the ancient technology claim. Pipes feel human because we use them everywhere, but the tube is not a human invention. Bodies are full of tubes, plants are full of tubes, worms make tubes, lava forms tubes, ice can form tubes, minerals can grow around tubes. The shape is ancient, practical, and common. Human pipes are just one expression of a much broader pattern. So when we find a tube-like thing in old rock, we should not immediately assume that technology has appeared out of place. We should remember that technology often imitates nature's efficient forms. A pipe is not proof of a plumber. Sometimes it is proof of a root. The geologists do not remove the story from Qinghai. They place it more firmly there. The formations are not evidence of something that had to come from outside the landscape. They may be evidence of older conditions within it. That is more meaningful. It tells us that the present dryness is not the whole story. It tells us that plants may once have grown in sediments later transformed. It tells us that mineral-rich water moved through the ground. It tells us that the cave and lakeside exposures reveal deeper histories. The mystery becomes local again, not in the small sense, but in the grounded sense. It belongs to the mountain, the basin, the sediment, and the old environments of that place, and there is still room for uncertainty. A responsible explanation does not need to pretend every detail is known perfectly. The available public information about the Baigong pipes is not as complete as one might like. Some reports are second-hand. Some descriptions are repeated without clear original data. Some popular accounts exaggerate. Some scientific details are summarized rather than fully published in a way that would satisfy every specialist. That means there may be limits to what can be said with total confidence. But limited data does not make the most dramatic claim stronger. It makes caution more important. When evidence is incomplete, the sensible response is not to fill the gap with aliens. It is to say what is known, what is likely, and what would be needed to support a more extraordinary conclusion. What is known well enough is that pipe-like natural formations exist, that iron-rich minerals can produce rusty appearances, that root casts and similar structures can become hollow cylinders in sedimentary rock, and that the Baigong objects have been widely interpreted by scientists as natural rather than artificial. What is not established is a manufactured metal pipe system from a pre-human or pre-civilization age. The difference between those two statements is the difference between geology and mythology. Mythology is not meant here as an insult. Myths are powerful stories. But when a physical object is at stake, we need to know whether we are listening to stone or to our own storytelling habits. So the geologists arrive with hammers, samples, tests, comparisons, and a complete lack of interest in preserving the most exciting misunderstanding. They do not come to make the world smaller. They come to make the explanation fit the evidence. And in the Baigong case, the explanation that fits best is not an ancient factory or a lost off-world installation, but natural mineral formations, likely connected to old plant roots and sedimentary chemistry. The fun is spoiled only if the fun required the Earth to be less capable than it is. If instead the fun is in discovering how a mountain can preserve the ghost of a root in the shape of a pipe, then the story is still very much alive. The next step is to look more closely at that natural explanation, because it deserves more than a quick mention at the end of a debunking. The idea that trees, roots, minerals and time can create structures mistaken for metal pipes is not merely an answer to a mystery. It is a mystery of its own kind, slower and less noisy, but full of detail. It takes us away from imagined machines and into an older environment where living roots moved through sediment, where water carried iron through tiny spaces, and where the remnants of plants could become hard, hollow, rust-coloured forms waiting for a future observer to mistake them for the work of hands. The quieter explanation begins not with a machine, but with a tree. That may feel like a rather unfair exchange if you arrived hoping for ancient engineers, hidden machinery, or visitors from the stars with a suspicious interest in plumbing. A tree seems almost too gentle for a mystery that has spent so much time dressed up as an impossible artifact. But in the case of the Baigong pipes, the tree is not a downgrade. It is the key to understanding how something living, ordinary and rooted in soil, could eventually become something hard, hollow, rust-coloured, and strange enough to make people wonder whether it had been built before humans were meant to exist. The most widely accepted natural explanation is that many of these pipe-like formations are fossilized casts of tree roots, formed when minerals gathered around roots in ancient sediments. The organic material decayed and hollow cylindrical shapes were left behind. Chinese scientists cited in a 2003 Xinmin Weekly report found organic plant matter in the material, and sections were said to show features resembling tree rings, which helped support the interpretation that the formations were fossil trees or roots rather than manufactured pipes. To see why that matters, it helps to forget metal for a moment and think about what a root actually is. A root is already a kind of natural pipe. It grows through soil in branching paths, taking in water and dissolved minerals, anchoring the plant, following moisture, avoiding obstacles, squeezing through cracks, and quietly doing all of this without ever once asking to be mistaken for alien infrastructure. Roots are irregular, but they are also tube-like. Some are thick and sturdy, some are thin and thread-like, some run downward, some sideways, some branch and split and taper. If you could see the underground shape of a tree or shrub as cleanly as you can see its trunk and leaves, it would look like a hidden network, a living system of natural conduits. So when a root system becomes preserved or mineralized, it can leave behind forms that look surprisingly close to pipes, not because anyone made them, but because tubes are useful shapes in both biology and engineering. This is one of those moments where the simplest explanation is not the dullest one. A living root becoming a stone tube is a remarkable process. It asks us to picture a landscape very different from the dry, open setting near Baigong Mountain today. The Qaidam Basin and the broader region have changed over time. Places that now seem arid and spare may once have supported more vegetation, depending on climate, water and lake conditions. According to the natural explanation summarised by Britannica, the Qaidam Basin had once been a subtropical area with plentiful vegetation, and that matters because roots cannot leave root casts unless something was growing there in the first place. The present landscape shows us the final page that has been left open. The root cast explanation asks us to turn backward through older pages to a time when plants grew in sediment that would later harden, mineralise and be exposed by erosion. Imagine then, not a pipe being installed in a mountain, but a plant growing in a softer landscape. Its roots push into sediment, grain by grain, finding water and stability. Around each root is a tiny chemical world. Roots do not simply sit in soil like sticks pushed into a cake. They interact with their surroundings. They release organic compounds. They change acidity. They affect moisture. They host microorganisms. They create small zones where minerals may gather differently than they do in the surrounding sediment. If the root is later buried, especially in a setting where oxygen is limited and groundwater continues to move through the material, decay may be slowed or altered. Minerals dissolved in the water begin to collect around the root, within its tissues, or in the space it leaves behind. Over long periods, the original plant material can vanish, but the shape it created remains. What was once soft becomes hard. What was once alive becomes a geological trace. There are two related ideas that help explain this transformation. The first is pedogenesis, which is the process of soil formation. Soil is not just crushed rock with a few worms passing through on errands. It is a living and chemical system, shaped by climate, organisms, minerals, water, and time. Roots are a major part of that system. They break up sediment, create channels, and influence where minerals accumulate. The second idea is diagenesis, which is what happens after sediment is deposited and begins its slow journey toward rock. Sediment is compacted. Water is squeezed through pores. Minerals precipitate and cement grains together. Organic material decays or is replaced. In the case of root casts, these processes can work together to make mineral elements form around roots, while the interiors rot away, leaving hollow pipe-like cylinders. Similar cylindrical structures in southern Louisiana were studied by Joanne Mosser and B.A. Schumacher, who interpreted them as products of pedogenesis and diagenesis around tree roots, a comparison often mentioned in discussions of Baigong. That comparison is useful because it takes the Baigong pipes out of the category of lonely impossibility. They are not the only natural objects ever to resemble pipes. The world contains many such forms. Root casts, burrows, concretions, mineral-filled cracks, and iron-cemented channels can all form shapes that feel oddly manufactured. A person standing in front of one striking example may think, surely this cannot happen naturally. A geologist, having seen cousins of the same process in other places, may think, yes, the Earth has been making suspicious tubes again. Context is not there to make the mystery less interesting. It is there to stop one example from pretending it is alone in the universe. The iron part of the story is especially important. The Baigong formations have often been described as rust-coloured, and some accounts say analyses found ferric oxide, silicon dioxide and calcium oxide. Those names can sound as if they belong in a locked cabinet in a laboratory, but they point toward common geological materials. Ferric oxide is oxidized iron, the reason many rocks and soils turn red or brown. Silicon dioxide is quartz or silica, abundant in sand and many sedimentary rocks. Calcium-bearing material may come from minerals such as calcite. Later investigations describe the formations as largely composed of naturally occurring carbon and pyrite cements, and pyrite and iron sulfide can participate in mineral cementation under certain conditions. None of this requires smelted iron pipework. It requires mineral-rich water and the right sedimentary environment. This is where the phrase "trees that turn to iron" needs to be understood gently. It does not mean that a tree trunk magically became an iron pipe, as if a forest woke up one morning and decided to enter the plumbing trade. It means that plant structures may have been preserved, replaced, coated, or cast by minerals that included iron-rich compounds. In some cases, the original organic tissues decay completely, leaving a hollow. In others, minerals replace tissue cell by cell, preserving the structure more directly. In still others, minerals form a hard rind around the root, while the centre disappears. The result can be a hollow tube, a filled cylinder, or an irregular pipe-like shape. If iron minerals are involved, the surface may take on that rusty colour that feels so persuasive to the modern eye. It looks like corrosion, but it may be mineralisation. The resemblance is real. The interpretation is the part that needs care. Think of a root as a candle placed in soft clay, though nature's version is much messier and takes far longer. If the clay hardens around the candle, and the candle later melts or rots away, the hollow left behind has the candle's shape. Nobody carved the hole afterward. Nobody drilled a tube into the hardened clay. The hollow formed because something was there before, and then it disappeared. Root casts work in a similar broad way, though with sediments, water, minerals and decay, instead of clay and candles. The root creates the path. The surrounding material records it. The root vanishes. The record remains. When later erosion cuts through that record, a cylinder appears in stone, and anyone unlucky enough to own a rusty garden hose may feel they have seen this object before. The hollow interior is one of the reasons the Baigong formations felt artificial. A hollow tube looks intentional, because in human technology hollowness usually has function. We hollow pipes so water can pass through. We make tubes because we want movement inside them. But nature creates hollows for many reasons. A shell can leave a mould. A burrow can be filled or left open. A root can decay. A gas bubble can create a cavity. A mineral shell can form around a softer centre. Later, when the softer centre is removed, hollowness remains. In nature, a hollow is not always a channel designed for use. Sometimes it is an absence with a preserved shape. It is the outline of something gone. The possible presence of tree ring-like features is another strong clue, because manufactured pipes do not usually carry botanical memories. If a cut section of one of these formations shows patterns resembling growth rings, that invites a plant-based explanation. It may not prove every individual tube formed the same way, and public reporting on the Baigong site has not always been as detailed as a specialist might want, but it does fit naturally with fossil wood or root casts. Plant material detected through atomic emission spectroscopy also fits this direction. If you are trying to choose between ancient pipework and mineralized roots, and the sample begins quietly mentioning plants, it is polite to listen. The root cast explanation also explains why the pipes vary so much. In an engineered system, especially one designed for fluid flow, pipes tend to follow practical rules. They may vary in diameter, but not randomly. They connect in ways that serve a purpose. They have consistent walls or fittings. They show evidence of manufacture. A fossil root system, on the other hand, naturally varies. Thick roots divide into smaller roots. Some parts preserve better than others. Some are exposed cleanly while others break. Some are hollow, some filled, some crushed, some stain more deeply with iron. Erosion may reveal a few sections and hide the rest. To someone hoping for machinery, the irregularity may feel like missing information. To someone thinking about roots, it is almost expected. There is also the matter of where these structures occur. Some Baigong pipe-like features were reported in and near a cave, others near the lake shore or within the lake area. If we treat them as manufactured, we begin searching for a system connecting the cave to the water. If we treat them as natural, their distribution can be understood through the old landscape. Roots grow through sediment where plants live. Sediment can later be exposed in different places by erosion. Lakeshores shift. Layers once buried become visible. What seems like a network leading to water may instead be a set of related formations exposed along an eroded surface. The modern lake invites the engineering story, but ancient lake conditions, sediments, and plant life may be the real explanation for why the materials formed and were later revealed. The phrase petrified trees is sometimes used in popular descriptions, and it is close enough to be helpful, though it can also be a little broad. Petrified wood usually refers to plant material that has been mineralized, often with silica, preserving the form of wood. Root casts may involve mineral formation around roots rather than direct replacement of wood tissue. The distinction matters to specialists, but for a sleepy evening journey through the mystery, the main idea is this. Plant structures can survive in stone not by remaining as ordinary wood, but by having their form recorded through minerals. A tree can disappear and still leave its shape behind. A root can rot away and still become visible long after the plant itself is gone. It is a kind of geological memory, though not in any mystical sense. Just chemistry, structure, and time doing their slow and dependable work. If we zoom in further, the process becomes even more interesting. Groundwater is rarely pure. As it moves through sediment and rock, it dissolves substances and carries them along. Under the right conditions, those dissolved materials come out of solution and form minerals. This can happen around organic material because decaying plant matter changes the local chemistry. Iron may precipitate, silica may cement grains, calcite may form. Pyrite may develop where sulfur and iron interact under low oxygen conditions. The root is not just a shape, it is a chemical disturbance. It creates a small environment where mineral formation may be different from the surrounding sediment. Over time, this can make the root zone harder than the material around it. Later, erosion removes the softer material first, leaving the hardened root cast standing out. That is one reason natural pipe-like forms can appear so distinct. They may have been reinforced by chemistry long before anyone saw them. There's a very old joke hiding in this. The pipes may have carried water after all, just not as pipes. Living roots carry water from soil into a plant. They are part of a transport system. If the Baigong formations are root casts, then their original function was biological. They were not built to drain a lake or cool a machine. They belonged to plants gathering water and nutrients in an ancient environment. Later, when mineralization transformed them, they began to look like the human-made tubes that also carry water. The same basic shape appears in two very different stories. One is engineering, one is life. The confusion is understandable because both stories use tubes, and tubes are simply good at moving things. This is part of a broader principle that appears again and again in nature. Similar shapes can arise from very different causes. A branching river network can resemble blood vessels. Lightning channels can resemble tree roots. Tree roots can resemble pipes. Basalt columns can resemble built pillars. Mineral crystals can resemble cut gems. Sand dunes can resemble waves. The human mind wants shape to reveal origin, but shape alone is not always enough. A circle can be a bubble, a fossil, a wheel, a crater, a coin, or a concretion. A tube can be a pipe, a root, a burrow, a lava conduit, or a mineralized crack. The question is not only what shape it has, but what material, context, texture, and history come with it. The natural explanation for Baigong also removes the need for an impossible technological timeline. If the structures are fossilized roots or related natural formations, then their great age is no longer a contradiction. They can be older than known human activity in the region, because they were not made by humans at all. The old date becomes part of the geological story rather than an attack on archaeology. This is one of the simplest ways a mystery can change. Nothing has to be thrown away except the assumption that the object is artificial. The age remains old, the location remains remote, the shapes remain strange, the rust colour remains real. But the meaning shifts from ancient technology to ancient environment. That shift is important because it lets the site tell us something about Earth rather than about an imagined civilization. A pipe-like root cast suggests vegetation, burial, mineral-rich groundwater, changing landscapes, and erosion. It may hint at past climate conditions. It may show how organic life and geological processes overlap. It may reveal that the region's present dryness is not the entire story. That is not as sensational as a 150,000-year-old industrial system, but it is more connected to the actual evidence. The Earth does not need to be forced into a science fiction role to be fascinating. It has its own script, though admittedly it writes very slowly and often in handwriting that looks like sandstone. One reason the alien or lost civilization version can feel more satisfying at first is that it gives the pipes a purpose. A natural explanation can seem to remove purpose, and humans like purpose. We want to know what a thing was for. In an engineered system, the pipes carried something. They were placed intentionally, their existence points to a mind. In the rootcast explanation, the purpose belonged to the original plant, not to the stone form we see later. The root's job was to keep the plant alive. The mineral cast's job is nothing at all. It is a byproduct, a trace, a leftover shape preserved by circumstances. That can feel emotionally thinner, but it is not scientifically weaker. Not every object in the ground was made for us to interpret. Some simply survived. There is a quiet humility in accepting that. The formations do not owe us a dramatic origin. They do not need to match the first story we told about them. They can be strange and natural at the same time. In fact, most natural things are strange once we stop treating them as background. A root becoming a stone tube is strange. Mineral-rich water right in the shape of a vanished plant into rock is strange. A dry basin preserving signs of an older vegetated environment is strange. The problem is not that the natural explanation lacks wonder. It is that the louder mystery trained us to expect the wrong kind of wonder. The geologist's interpretation also helps explain why the Baigong pipes are a good example of mistaken identity rather than deliberate deception. Someone saw a shape that genuinely resembled a pipe. The colour genuinely suggested rust. The location genuinely felt unusual. The age claim genuinely made the story feel impossible. None of those first impressions had to be dishonest. They simply needed correction. Science often works this way. It takes a first impression and refines it. The eye says pipe. The sample says mineralized plant trace. The rumour says impossible artifact. The context says natural formation. Each step does not humiliate the earlier one. It improves it. Of course, not every question about the Baigong pipes is perfectly closed. Publicly available information is uneven, and some claims come from reports rather than detailed peer-reviewed site studies. That means a careful narrator should not pretend to know every measurement, every sample, or every individual object at the site. But the broader explanation remains strong because the claimed artificial interpretation lacks the support it would need, while natural processes are known to produce similar forms. When the evidence is incomplete, the responsible move is not to choose the most exciting answer. It is to choose the explanation that fits the known facts with the fewest unsupported additions. Fossilized roots and mineralized sediment require ordinary earth processes. Ancient metal pipework before known technology requires an entire missing civilization or extraterrestrial project, plus a way to explain why the material looks geological and why plant traces appear in it. One explanation walks in with a small bag, the other arrives with a moving truck. There is a useful lesson in that comparison. Simpler does not mean simplistic. A natural explanation can be complex. It can involve biology, chemistry, sedimentology, climate history, groundwater, mineral cementation, erosion, and human perception. But it does not add unnecessary actors. It does not invent builders when processes are enough. It does not summon a lost industrial society to explain something that roots and minerals can create. This is often called parsimony, though that word sounds a little like a vegetable one might avoid at dinner. The basic idea is gentle. Do not add more mystery than the evidence requires. Seen this way, the Baigong pipes become less like a failed alien story and more like a successful Earth story. They show how a landscape can preserve a former living system in a form that later resembles technology. They show how the colour of iron can mislead us because we associate rust with human metal. They show how old dates can be misunderstood when the object being dated is misclassified. They show how a cave, a lake, and a remote mountain can encourage the mind to arrange natural features into an imagined machine. And they show that the boundary between artifact and natural formation is not always obvious at first glance. This boundary has confused people many times. Concretions have been mistaken for cannonballs or eggs. Weathered stones have been mistaken for statues. Mineral veins have been read as writing. Fossil roots have been treated as tools or pipes. Even experienced observers can be fooled if they see an object outside its context. That is why context is everything. A pipe in a city wall is probably a pipe. A pipe-like structure embedded in old sediment near a lake basin, with plant matter and mineral cements, is a different matter. The shape is not enough. The story must come from the whole setting. And perhaps there is something fitting about trees being at the heart of this mystery. Trees are natural timekeepers in their own way. Their rings record seasons, their roots record hidden searches for water. Their wood can preserve climate signals, fires, droughts, and growth. When trees fossilize, they carry fragments of old environments into the present. The Baigong formations, if they are indeed root casts as the leading explanation suggests, are not merely fake pipes. They are old biological traces that survived long enough to be mistaken for technology. They are reminders that life leaves architecture behind, even when no building was intended. The idea of trees turning to iron also gives the story a softer kind of strangeness. There is no need for a launch pad under the mountain, no need for a lost city humming beneath the rock, no need for engineers with impossible tools. Instead, there are roots growing quietly in ancient sediment, groundwater carrying minerals through darkness, iron staining the remains, and time doing what time does best, changing one thing into another so slowly that the final form seems impossible without the missing steps. The pipes were never installed. They grew, decayed, hardened, and waited. That may be the real turn in the Baigong story. The mystery does not disappear when we remove the ancient aliens or lost civilization. It moves. It moves from the sky back into the soil, from imagined machines back into roots, from impossible technology back into deep environmental history. It becomes less about who built the pipes, and more about why we were so ready to see building in the first place. Because once the natural explanation is understood, another question begins to rise quietly beside it. Why did so many people prefer the stranger version? Why does a rusty shape in stone become a doorway to hidden civilizations almost immediately? Why do certain rocks turn into stories so quickly, while the slower explanations wait patiently nearby, holding all the evidence and somehow still looking less invited to the party? A strange rock rarely becomes famous simply by being strange. There are strange rocks everywhere. Some look like faces, some look like bones, some look like eggs, some look like tools, and quite a few look like things that would be easier to explain if the planet had once been used as a storage cupboard by someone with unusual habits. Most of them sit quietly where erosion left them, noticed only by hikers, geologists, sheep, and the occasional person who takes a photograph and says, "Well, that's odd." But every now and then a rock crosses a line. It becomes not just unusual but suggestive. It resembles something we know. It appears in a place where that familiar thing does not belong. It gains a story, then a better story, then a story with sharper edges and a more dramatic title. Before long, What began as a mineral formation or fossil trace is no longer only an object in the landscape. It is evidence, mystery, warning, proof, clue, or secret, depending on who is telling it. The Baigong pipes are a very good example of this. If they had been described from the beginning as iron-rich root casts in sedimentary rock near a lake basin, they might still have interested geologists, but they probably would not have travelled very far beyond that circle. There is nothing wrong with iron-rich root casts, of course. They are perfectly respectable natural features and likely excellent company if one enjoys sediment chemistry. But they do not instantly make the average person lean closer to the screen, describe the same forms as ancient metal pipes found in stone before humans could have made them, and the story changes completely. Now it has conflict, it has a problem. It has a challenge to accepted history. It has a remote landscape, an object that looks artificial, and just enough uncertainty to let imagination move in and rearrange the furniture. This is one of the main reasons strange rocks become strange stories. They often begin with recognition. The eye sees something familiar inside something unfamiliar. A round stone becomes an egg. A flat flake becomes a blade. A hole in rock becomes a socket. A branching mineral pattern becomes writing. A tube-like formation becomes a pipe. Recognition is fast, much faster than careful thought. The brain is built to sort the world quickly, because for most of human history, slow pattern recognition was not always a winning strategy. If something in the grass might be a predator, it was safer to react first and apologise to the grass later. That habit did not vanish when we built houses, invented archaeology, and learned to argue online. It is still with us. We see patterns quickly. We see meaning quickly. Sometimes we see too much. There is a name often used for this tendency: pareidolia. It is the habit of seeing recognisable shapes in random or natural patterns. Faces in clouds, animals in tree bark, a man in the moon, a face on Mars, a dragon in a pile of laundry, especially if the laundry has been left long enough to develop its own political system. Pareidolia is not a flaw exactly. It is a side effect of a brain that is very good at making sense of messy information. Faces matter to us, so we detect face-like patterns easily. Tools matter to us, so tool-like shapes catch our attention. Pipes matter to us, because we live in a world full of plumbing, engines, cables, vents, drains and machines, so pipe-like forms feel familiar and deliberate. The resemblance is often real. The problem comes when resemblance is treated as identity. The Baigong formations did not need to be perfect pipes to start a pipe story. They only needed to be pipe-like enough. A hollow cylinder, a rusty colour, an embedded position in rock and a location near a lake are more than enough for the mind to begin assembling a system. This is another important habit. We do not only recognise individual shapes, we connect them into possible purposes. A tube suggests flow, a cave suggests entrance, a lake suggests water, a remote mountain suggests secrecy or age. Put those pieces together and the mind can build a hidden installation before anyone has checked whether the tube is actually manufactured. This is not stupidity, it is storytelling, and storytelling is one of the strongest things humans do. Stories help us remember, they help us teach, they help us organise cause and effect. A loose collection of facts is hard to hold in the mind, but a story gives them structure. Some iron-rich cylindrical formations were found in sedimentary rock is a fact-shaped sentence. It may be accurate, but it does not immediately unfold into scenes. Ancient metal pipes were found in a mountain where humans did not yet exist is a story-shaped sentence. It gives the listener a puzzle. It creates a before and after. It invites a hidden actor. It asks who made them? Why were they there? What happened to the builders? It has movement. The first sentence sits at a desk. The second has already rented a small boat and is rowing across a moonlit lake. This is why strange stories often beat careful explanations in the first round. They are easier to remember and easier to repeat. Each retelling tends to smooth away the cautious parts. Pipe-like structures becomes pipes. Iron-rich minerals becomes metal. Reported age becomes dated to. Possible natural explanation becomes something mentioned at the end, if at all, after the mystery has had time to put on a splendid hat. The simplified version spreads because it is cleaner. It does not ask the listener to hold too many conditions. It does not slow down for uncertainty. It moves in a straight line from object to implication, and straight lines are very attractive when the truth is actually a winding path through sediment, chemistry, translation, and human expectation. There is also a social pleasure in mysteries. They give people something to share, something to debate, something to feel clever about. A person who encounters the Baigong pipe story for the first time may feel they have stumbled onto a hidden doorway. Passing it to someone else becomes part of the enjoyment. "Have you heard about this?" is a powerful sentence. It makes the speaker a messenger from the edge of the known world, even if the edge of the known world is currently open in a browser tab beside a half-finished cup of tea. Strange objects become social objects. They travel not only because of evidence, but because they create reactions: surprise, doubt, excitement, suspicion. The story becomes a small event between people. The idea that accepted history may be incomplete adds another layer. Many people have a quiet suspicion that official explanations are too tidy, and in a broad sense, they are right. Textbooks simplify, museums select, timelines compress, science changes as new evidence appears. The past is not fully known. There are gaps everywhere. New discoveries can and do revise what experts think. Humans reach some places earlier than once believed. Ancient peoples built and understood more than earlier scholars sometimes gave them credit for. Climate histories shift. Lost settlements are found. Old assumptions fall apart. So when a story like the Baigong pipes appears, it can attach itself to a true general idea. Knowledge is incomplete. From there, it makes a much less secure leap. Because knowledge is incomplete, this particular dramatic claim may be true. That leap is tempting, but it is not evidence. There is a difference between being open-minded and letting every idea move in without paying rent. An open mind should allow new evidence to enter. It should also notice whether the evidence is carrying mud through the hallway. The Baigong pipes invite openness because they look strange and the early claims sound challenging. But openness does not mean accepting the most exciting interpretation first. It means being willing to ask what the formations actually are, even if the answer is less dramatic than expected. A genuinely open mind must be open to natural explanations too. Otherwise, it is not open. It is simply leaning very far in one preferred direction and calling the posture curiosity. Strange rocks also become strange stories because natural processes are often unfamiliar. Most people know what a pipe is, but fewer people know what a root cast is. Most people know what rust looks like, but fewer people know how iron oxide stains sediment. Most people understand that humans make tools, but fewer have spent time thinking about how minerals grow around decaying organic matter. This creates an imbalance. The artificial explanation uses familiar objects from everyday life. The natural explanation uses processes that may be accurate but less immediately available in memory. When the brain has a choice between pipe and diagenetic mineralization around plant material, it chooses pipe before the second phrase has even found a comfortable chair. This is not helped by the fact that geology often works on timescales that do not feel intuitive. We can understand a person making a pipe in a workshop. We can picture hands, tools, heat, decisions, mistakes. Perhaps someone dropping something and pretending they meant to do that. It is harder to picture groundwater moving through sediment for thousands of years, slowly depositing minerals around roots that have long since decayed. The natural process is not actually vague, but it feels vague because it is slow and distributed. There is no single moment when the pipe-like form is made. It forms gradually. Human stories like clear moments, someone built it, someone buried it, someone left. Nature often gives us slow transitions instead, and slow transitions make less satisfying drama unless we learn how to watch them. A strange object can also become a strange story when it appears isolated from context. A photograph of a rusty tube in rock may look astonishing. A wider view of the sedimentary layers, mineral staining, related formations, erosion patterns, and regional geology might make it much less mysterious. Cropping is powerful, not only in images but in storytelling. Remove the surrounding context and an object becomes freer to mean almost anything. Put the context back and the object has to behave. Many famous mystery claims depend on a kind of narrative close-up. They show the oddest feature, describe the most dramatic possibility, and leave the larger setting dim. The Baigong pipes benefit from that close-up effect. The remote cave and lake are described, but the geological environment often arrives late, like a sensible relative trying to calm everyone down after the exciting rumour has already been served with biscuits. There is also the matter of authority. A story feels stronger when it mentions scientists, tests, laboratories, or exact numbers. In the Baigong case, references to chemical analysis and dating help to give the mystery a scientific flavour, even when the interpretation of those details was not careful. A number like 150,000 years sounds precise. A percentage of ferric oxide sounds technical. An unidentified component sounds intriguing. These details can be used responsibly, but they can also be arranged like stage props. The listener hears scientific language and assumes the dramatic conclusion has scientific backing. Yet a test result only supports what it actually supports. Iron oxide supports iron-rich material. It does not support a smelted pipe unless other evidence shows manufacture. An old date supports an old material or event within the method's limits. It does not support ancient technology unless the object itself is clearly technological. Numbers can be true and still be used to tell a misleading story. The unknown is another powerful ingredient. If part of a material is unidentified, if a site has not been exhaustively studied, if reports are incomplete, if translations differ, if local accounts vary, the gaps become fertile ground. A careful person says, "We do not yet know that detail." A mystery story says, "What are they hiding?" Or could this be something beyond our understanding? Sometimes the honest answer is simply that the reporting is messy, the data are limited, or nobody has yet done the kind of study that would settle every question. But gaps do not automatically favour the most exotic explanation. A missing piece in a jigsaw puzzle does not mean the picture is secretly a dragon. It may just mean the piece is under the sofa. The Baigong story also shows how place affects belief. A remote landscape makes unusual objects feel older and less accountable. The same tube-like formation in a well-studied roadside cutting might be called geology. In a cave near a lake in western China, it becomes an ancient enigma. Distance gives mystery room to breathe. Most viewers will never visit the site, never inspect the surrounding rock, never compare samples, never talk to local geologists. They experience the place through descriptions. Those descriptions can emphasize emptiness, strangeness, isolation, and age. The landscape becomes a mood, and mood can quietly support belief. This is one reason calm, specific description matters. The more accurately we place an object in its real environment, the less it floats into fantasy. There is also a hidden comfort in believing that strange objects were made by someone. A made object has intention behind it. Even if the maker is unknown, the existence of a maker gives the world a certain shape. Someone planned, someone acted, someone left a clue. A natural formation, by contrast, may feel indifferent. It formed because conditions allowed it. It does not care whether we notice. It does not explain itself in human terms. This can be less emotionally satisfying. Humans are social creatures, and we naturally look for agents. We ask who did this before we ask what process produced this. In daily life, that works well. If your chair is moved, someone probably moved it. If your soup is gone, someone probably ate it. unless the soup has achieved a level of independence that would require a separate investigation. But in geology, who is often the wrong question. The Baigong pipes ask us to replace who with how, and that is a difficult but valuable shift. The temptation of strange stories is especially strong when the natural explanation seems to take something away. If you believe the pipes might be proof of ancient visitors, then root casts can feel like a loss. The story becomes smaller, but this feeling comes from comparing explanations by drama rather than by depth. The natural explanation is not small. It reaches into old climates, plant life, mineral flow, sediment formation, erosion, human perception, and the way stories spread. It may lack characters, but it has processes that connect living roots to future observers across immense time. It is only smaller if the scale we care about is spectacle. If the scale is connection, it is very large indeed. Another reason strange rocks become strange stories is that debunking often arrives in an unpleasant form. People who enjoy mysteries may have had the experience of someone dismissing their curiosity with a smirk. That rarely helps. It can make the dramatic story feel warmer, and the scientific explanation feel cold, even when the science is right. A better approach is to keep the wonder while correcting the claim. The Baigong pipes are not foolish because they attracted attention. They attracted attention because they genuinely look intriguing. The right response is not to laugh at the first impression, but to guide it. Yes, they look like pipes. Yes, the setting is unusual. Yes, the rust colour is suggestive. Now let us ask what processes could make that. Let us examine the material. Let us compare. Let us see whether the story survives contact with the rock. The human love of mystery is not the enemy here. In fact, without that love, many people would never learn about geology at all. A strange claim can be a doorway into real science. Someone arrives for aliens and leaves knowing about root casts, iron oxides, sedimentary basins, and the importance of context. That is not a bad outcome. The problem only comes if the doorway becomes a trap, if the person refuses to walk beyond the first exciting version. Mystery should begin investigation, not replace it. It should be the invitation, not the conclusion. There is also a useful humility in recognizing how often nature imitates design. We are used to thinking of design as the source of order, but natural processes produce order all the time. Crystals grow in repeating patterns. Snowflakes form delicate structures. Honeycombs display efficient geometry. Rivers branch. Shells spiral. Basalt cools into columns. Sand sorts itself into ripples. Roots form networks. None of these require a blueprint in the human sense. They require rules, energy, matter, and time. When we find order in nature, we should not be shocked too quickly. Sometimes the appearance of design is simply the visible result of physical laws doing consistent work. The Baigong pipes fit into that wider lesson. Tube-like forms are not rare in nature because tubes solve many problems. They allow movement, growth, flow, support, or the preservation of a former pathway. A root cast is not artificial, but it is not shapeless either. It has structure because the root had structure. Minerals preserved or outline that structure because chemical conditions favoured it. The result looks designed because life itself is organised, and geology can preserve that organisation in altered form. In other words, the pipe-like shape may come not from machinery, but from biology. It is not a product of alien engineering. It is a record of a plant once doing its quiet work underground. Strange stories also persist because corrections are often less sticky than claims. Once people have heard metal pipes before humans existed, the phrase stays. Later, when someone explains mineralized roots, the explanation has to compete with the original image. Images are stubborn. The brain holds on to the first vivid version and treats later corrections as amendments written in smaller print. This is why careful wording at the beginning matters so much. If the earliest reports had consistently said pipe-like mineral formations, the public memory might have formed differently. But once pipes became the name, The interpretation hid inside the vocabulary. The object was already half decided before the evidence arrived. This happens far beyond Baigong. Many natural formations inherit names that imply artificial or supernatural origins. Fairy chimneys, devil's towers, giants' causeways, witch stones, dragon bones. These names are often charming, and they do not have to be taken literally, but they remind us that humans name the world through stories. Names are not neutral, they guide attention. Call something a pipe, and people look for plumbing. Call it a root cast, and people look for plants and minerals. Call it an alien artifact, and people look up. The same object can be pulled in different directions by different names. In the end, strange rocks become strange stories because humans are not cameras. We do not simply record the world, we interpret it. We bring memory, culture, tools, fears, hopes, and familiar objects with us. We see a rusty tube in stone and bring every pipe we have ever known. We see a cave and bring every story about hidden places. We see a remote lake and bring every idea about isolation and secrets. The Baigong pipes became famous because they met the human mind halfway. They were strange enough to invite wonder and familiar enough to invite a mistake. That does not make the story worthless. It makes it useful. It shows how wonder begins, how it can go wrong, and how it can be guided back toward evidence. It shows that the first version of a mystery is often not the best version. It shows that natural explanations do not always close doors. Sometimes they open quieter ones. Behind the ancient alien claim is a lesson in geology. Behind the lost civilization idea is a lesson in evidence. Behind the rusty pipe shape is a lesson in roots, minerals and time. And behind the whole journey is a reminder that the Earth does not need to be rewritten into fantasy to remain surprising. So when we hear a claim like metal pipes were found before humans existed, we can let ourselves feel the little spark of curiosity. There is no need to stamp it out. That spark is useful. It wakes the mind. It asks for a closer look, but then we can carry it carefully, not letting it set fire to everything in the room. We can ask what was found, what was assumed, what was tested, what was named too quickly, and what natural processes might explain the shape. We can enjoy the mystery without surrendering to it. We can let evidence have the final word, or at least the next word, which is usually more than enough for one evening. And with the Baigong pipes, that next word leads us back to a simple but important place. The story is no longer only about whether a few rust-coloured tubes were made by ancient hands or by old roots. It is about how we decide what counts as evidence, how we protect wonder from becoming belief too quickly, and how the deepest surprises of Earth often arrive not as proof that everything we know is wrong, but as reminders that the world is more patient, more inventive, and much older than our first explanations. The Baigong pipes leave us in a useful place, because they do not give us the kind of mystery that can only be enjoyed if we refuse to understand it. They give us something better. They give us a mystery that changes as we look at it. At first, it seems to be about impossible metal, ancient technology, and a mountain holding a secret from before human history had properly begun. Then, as the details settle down, it becomes a story about iron-rich mineral formations, root casts, old sediments, and the slow work of water and chemistry. And then, after that, it becomes something larger again. Not larger in the dramatic sense, with hidden machines and visitors from the stars, but larger in the quieter sense. It becomes a story about how we meet the unknown, how we decide what counts as evidence, and how time can turn ordinary things into objects that feel impossible when we find them much later. That may be the real gift of the Baigong pipes. They are not important, because they prove that an advanced civilization existed in Qinghai before known humans could have built metal systems. The available evidence does not support that. They are important because they show how easy it is for a real object to become wrapped in a bigger story, especially when the object resembles something familiar. A rusty-looking tube in stone is not just a shape, it is an invitation. It invites the mind to ask who made it, what flowed through it, why it was hidden, and what else might be buried nearby. Those are natural questions, The mistake is not in asking them. The mistake would be answering them too quickly, before the rock, the setting, and the material have had a chance to speak. The first lesson, then, is that wonder is not the opposite of evidence. Wonder is the beginning of evidence. It is the feeling that makes us pause and look again. Without wonder, the pipe-like structures near Baigong Mountain would be easy to ignore. They might remain curious objects in a dry landscape, known only to a few visitors or specialists. Wonder notices that something does not fit the first category we gave it. It says gently, "There is something here worth understanding. That is a valuable instinct." Many discoveries begin with someone noticing an odd pattern, an unexpected shape, a result that does not match the usual explanation. Science itself is built on that moment of attention. It is not built by people who never feel surprise. It is built by people who feel surprise and then stay long enough to test it. Evidence is what keeps wonder honest. It does not kill the feeling. It gives it somewhere to stand. A claim like ancient metal pipes before known human technology is not a small claim. It asks us to rewrite much more than the story of one mountain. It asks us to rethink human history, metallurgy, settlement, and perhaps even our place in the universe. A claim like that needs more than an interesting resemblance. It needs clear material proof of manufacture, secure dating, context, repeated analysis, and associated signs that fit the proposed explanation. It needs to show not only that something looks like a pipe, but that it was made as a pipe. It needs to show not only that the material is old, but that the object's artificial form is old. Those are different things, and the difference matters. This is where the Baigong story becomes a gentle lesson in patience. The first version of a mystery is often the most exciting because it has the fewest responsibilities. It can make large claims without carrying all the details. It can say metal, ancient, impossible, and let the listener's imagination do the rest. The slower explanation has to work harder. It must talk about iron oxides, silica, calcium compounds, pyrite, sediment, roots, decay, mineralization, and erosion. It must explain why a tube-like shape does not automatically mean a pipe. It must ask the audience to trade a sudden thrill for a longer understanding. That is difficult trade, especially when the sudden thrill comes with aliens and the longer understanding comes with soil chemistry. But the longer understanding is usually where the real depth is hiding. Time is the other teacher in this story. The Baigong pipes feel strange because they appear to collapse time. They bring together the shape of modern technology and the age of ancient geology. A pipe is something we associate with recent human life, with buildings, factories, irrigation, boilers, drains, and infrastructure. Old stone belongs to another kind of time. When those two impressions appear together, the mind feels a jolt. It seems as if one era has broken into another, but that jolt depends on the assumption that the shape must belong to technology. If the shape instead comes from roots and minerals, then the time problem changes completely. The old age is no longer impossible, it is expected. The Earth has been making and preserving shapes for far longer than humans have been naming them. This is one of the quiet, humbling effects of geology. It reminds us that our familiar world is not the measure of all shapes. We did not invent the tube. We use tubes because tubes work. Plants use tubes. Bodies use tubes. Worms make tubes. Lava makes tubes. Water carves channels. Minerals line cavities. Roots branch through soil in systems that can look, after fossilization, oddly like the beginnings of plumbing. Human technology often borrows from forms that nature already found useful. So when we see a tube in stone, it is worth remembering that the shape may be older than our use of it. We are not always looking at a human object out of place. Sometimes we are looking at a natural form that our technology has taught us to recognize in a human way. The Baigong pipes also teach us that the past is not only hidden in artifacts, it is hidden in processes. We often think of history as something left behind by hands. Tools, walls, pots, bones, roads. inscriptions, houses, graves. Those are important, and they let us reconstruct human lives with remarkable care. But Earth's deeper past is often recorded without hands at all. It is recorded in minerals, layers, fossils, shorelines, sediments, and chemical traces. A root cast is not a message left for us. It is not a monument. It was not made to be interpreted. It is simply the remains of a process that happened under specific conditions and survived long enough to become visible. That does not make it less meaningful. It means the meaning has to be found through understanding rather than intention. There is comfort in that if we allow it. Not every strange thing needs a maker. Not every pattern needs a plan. Not every familiar shape is evidence of a familiar cause. The world is full of structure because physical laws produce structure. Life produces structure. Chemistry produces structure. Time preserves, distorts, buries, reveals, and sometimes disguises structure. A natural explanation does not make the world flat or empty. It makes it more active. It asks us to see Earth not as a stage where interesting things only happen when people or imagined visitors do something, but as a maker in its own right. The ground beneath us is not passive. It builds, dissolves, hardens, stains, cracks, lifts, and exposes. It makes objects that can fool the eye because it has no interest in matching our categories. This is why the Baigong pipes are more useful as a case study than as a supposed proof of hidden technology. They show the entire life cycle of a mystery. First, an unusual object appears, then a familiar name is attached to it, then the name carries assumptions. Pipe becomes metal, metal becomes manufactured, manufactured becomes ancient technology. Ancient technology becomes lost civilization or alien site. Each step feels natural once the previous one is accepted. But if we walk backward, the chain becomes fragile. Are they definitely pipes? Are they definitely manufactured? Are they definitely metal in the industrial sense? Is the age being applied to the right thing? Is there supporting context? Once those questions are asked, the grand story begins to lose its balance. Not because mystery is forbidden, but because the evidence is not strong enough to hold it. A good mystery should become clearer as more is learned, even if the answer is unexpected. The Baigong pipes do that. The closer we move, the less they look like a technological impossibility, and the more they look like a misunderstanding born from real geological oddity. That is not a failure. It is the mystery doing its work properly. It led us to a remote region, made us ask questions about time and material, introduced us to root casts and mineralization, and showed us how human perception can turn a shape into a story. It also reminded us to be careful with words. Pipe-like is not the same as pipe. Iron-rich is not the same as smelted metal. Old is not the same as made by ancient engineers. Unexplained is not the same as impossible. These small differences are the hinges on which large claims swing. There is a wider lesson here about how we treat extraordinary claims. Skepticism is sometimes mistaken for a lack of imagination, but real skepticism requires imagination. It asks us to imagine several possible explanations and then compare them carefully. It asks us to imagine natural processes that may not be obvious at first glance. It asks us to imagine that our first impression might be wrong. That is not cold or narrow. It is generous. It gives the world more than one chance to explain itself. The most exciting answer may still turn out to be true in some cases, but it has to earn that place. If aliens had really left an installation near Baigong Mountain, evidence should point strongly in that direction. If a lost civilization had really built metal pipes there long before known technology, the ground should hold more than resemblance. Until then, roots and minerals remain not only simpler, but stronger. This does not mean we should stop enjoying strange stories. A world with no room for strange stories would be a rather thin place to live. The problem is not the story itself. The problem is forgetting when a story is a story. The Baigong pipes as a tale of ancient aliens can be entertaining, The Baigong pipes as proof of ancient aliens require evidence they do not have. There is a difference between wondering and concluding, between asking what if and saying therefore, between letting the imagination roam and allowing it to sign the final report. A healthy curiosity knows how to do both things in turn. It lets the mind wander, then invites it back to check the map. The story also teaches us something about humility before time. A root that grows in sediment does not know that one day it may become the centre of an argument about ancient technology. A mineral deposit does not know that its red-brown colour will remind future humans of rust. A cave does not know that its darkness will make people imagine hidden rooms. A lake does not know that its closeness to a formation will make people picture pipelines. These things simply happen. Then humans arrive late, very late, and try to organise what they see into categories that make sense in a human lifetime. Sometimes we succeed. Sometimes we rush. The Baigong pipes remind us that deep time is not arranged for quick understanding. It is layered, altered, and often missing the steps we would like to see. They also remind us that the present landscape is not the whole landscape. The area near Baigong Mountain today may look dry and spare, but the natural explanation points to older conditions, to vegetation, sediments, groundwater, and environmental change. A root cast is a trace of a vanished setting. It says, in its own material way, this place was not always exactly as it is now. That is one of the most important ideas in earth science. Every landscape is temporary. Deserts have histories, lakes have histories, mountains have histories, soil has histories. A dry cave wall may contain traces of wetter times. A rusty tube-like form may be the shadow of a living root. The surface is never the whole story, and perhaps that is why the Baigong pipes should not be treated only as a debunked mystery. They are more interesting than that. A debunked mystery is often spoken of as if it has been emptied. But Baigong is not empty. It contains a lesson in geology, perception, media and curiosity. It shows how quickly a familiar shape can be pulled into a dramatic claim. It shows why context matters. It shows why evidence must be specific. It shows why natural processes deserve more respect. And it shows why wonder should be guided rather than mocked. People were interested in the Baigong pipes because the world still has the power to surprise them. That is a good thing. The task is not to remove surprise. It is to teach surprise how to look more carefully. There is also a kind of kindness in the natural explanation. The alien version makes the pipes foreign to Earth, as if their strangeness must have come from elsewhere. The root cast explanation brings them home. It says the strangeness belongs here. It belongs to plants, minerals, sediments and time. It belongs to the ancient environment of the basin. It belongs to the Earth's own ability to produce forms that resemble our inventions. That is a more intimate kind of wonder. It does not require the stars to visit. It asks us to notice what the ground has already done. So what do the Baigong pipes teach us? They teach us to pause at the first impression, but not to worship it. They teach us that resemblance can begin an investigation but should not end one. They teach us that extraordinary claims need evidence strong enough to match their consequences. They teach us that natural explanations can be deep, detailed, and beautiful, even when they are less dramatic than the legends they replace. They teach us that time changes things so thoroughly that the missing steps can make the final result feel impossible. And they teach us that the world is full of objects waiting to be misunderstood, not because we're foolish, but because we are human. As our quiet journey returns from the mountain and the lake, it is worth holding on to both parts of the story. Hold on to the first spark, the feeling that a rusty tube in ancient stone is worth noticing. That spark is precious. It is the beginning of curiosity. But hold on to the second part as well. The careful work that asks what the object is made of, where it sits, how it formed, and whether a simpler process can explain it. That second part is what keeps curiosity from drifting away into whatever answer feels most exciting. Together they make a better way of looking at strange things. Wonder opens the door. Evidence helps us walk through it without falling into the cellar. And now, after all this talk of stone, roots, rust, lakes, lost civilizations and the slow patience of the earth, we have moved some distance from where we began. At first, there was a claim that sounded almost impossible. Metal pipes found before humans should have existed there to make them. Then came the landscape of Qinghai, the cave beneath Baigong Mountain, the rust-coloured tubes, the dramatic interpretations, the geologists with their inconvenient samples, and finally the quieter explanation of trees, minerals, and time. The story has not become less strange, it has become better understood. That is often what science does at its best. It does not take the world's strangeness away. It shows us where the strangeness really lives. Maybe, wherever you are listening from tonight, there is something ordinary nearby that would look mysterious if time took it away from its context. A pipe under a sink, a wire in a wall, a cup on a table, a mark in wood, a stone in a garden. Imagine it buried, changed, stained, broken, and found by someone far in the future who no longer knows the world that made it. They might guess wrong too. They might build a story around it. They might wonder about us the way some people wondered about Baigong. That thought is oddly calming. We are all temporary interpreters of a world that was here long before us, and will keep rearranging our traces long after we have gone. So, as we leave Baigong Mountain behind for now, let me ask you gently one more time. Where are you listening from, and what quiet object around you might become a mystery if enough time passed over it? Perhaps a stone on a windowsill, a mug beside the bed, a line of pipes in an old wall, or something so ordinary you hardly see it anymore. The earth is very good at turning ordinary things into puzzles, and the mind is very good at turning puzzles into stories. If this slow walk through the Baigong pipes brought you a little calm, a little curiosity, or just a pleasant reason to think about rocks before sleep, I would be grateful if you liked the video, subscribed, and shared this quiet place with someone else who enjoys the stranger corners of our planet. For now, the mountain stays where it is, the lake rests beside it, and the rust-coloured forms remain in the stone, no longer quite impossible, but still quietly interesting. Not proof of ancient machines, perhaps, but proof of something just as valuable. That wonder and evidence can sit together, that Earth has more patience than rumour, and that even a root, given enough minerals and enough time, can become the beginning of a very strange story. Sleep well, fellow traveller, wherever you are tonight, and may your own small corner of the world feel a little more curious, a little more grounded, and a little more quietly alive.